defend that right. And we should be making voting easier and not a scary process, not a thing where we go in and wait in line and have to deal with intimidation, have to deal with people with clipboards or cameras or cell phones following us all along through that process. I mean, we should be making it easier for people to vote, not creating barriers or any type of intimidation when they're voting. Do you agree?
I absolutely, wholeheartedly agree with your comments, and like I said, I just don't know about the merits of the language, the provision of the poll watcher in this bill, and the necessity to amp it up when it comes to poll watching.
Now, going back to the free reign and the movement of these poll watchers, as it's written in the bill, do we have concerns about, or does the bill give any guidance, rather, on what's permissible, what's not permissible, what the poll watcher can do, how much movement, how close they can be to the poll watcher? Does it have any training for the poll watcher on what they can and cannot do?
Well, I am so glad you brought up training, because I recall you made some what I thought were some very convincing remarks about the need for training manuals for poll watchers, because the poll workers, they have to go through extensive training. And if we're expanding the role of poll watchers, they too should have to have some sort of a training. And I'm glad you bring it up now. I'm glad you brought it up back then. And there is a manual, but it's not a mandate. They don't have to do it. And it's something that should happen before they even get to the polling place, not when they get there. You know, the precinct judges, they are so busy. So for them to have to go and tend to a poll watcher and maybe go through a manual or talk to them about the manual, that's taking away from their time doing what they're supposed to be doing and not babysitting a poll watcher.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that. We pushed for training. All they really need to do is sign an oath. And the concern is that what's interesting to me is that if there is this type of fraud and this type of illegal actions happening as it's claimed, wouldn't we want to give poll watchers training to identify these type of irregularities? Isn't it strange that we want to empower poll watchers, but let's not give them the training to find out what's wrong or what's actually happening? It's counterintuitive. You'd think that we would want to give more training to these poll watchers to keep the election process secure and safe, yet the bill does not provide or require training to identify those type of irregularities. What's wrong with that?
Well, there's so many things wrong with that, but and some of them you've pointed out so eloquently. This, I don't know many people that want to be a poll watcher. I mean, that's been the tradition. Most people don't want to be confined in the polling place. Most people would prefer to be out, pushing cards, greeting voters, convincing voters. But here, now, with this bill and it empowering poll watchers, I think you're going to have more people chomping at the bit to do it.
Yeah. And, do we know if the poll watcher is allowed to touch the ballot when somebody is...
I'm not advised.
It's not advised, neither am I. In Harris County, you tell me if you heard about this, but there were at least 44 reports of inappropriate behavior of poll watchers in Harris County alone. But this bill doesn't seem to create any kind of consequences for poll watchers who may intimidate voters or interfere with the voting process. As I stated before, it does require them to take an oath, but there's no training. So without any consequences for these poll watchers, they can essentially violate in some way or harass a voter with no documented consequences or any repercussions.
That's correct. And I'm glad you noted those 44 incidents in Harris County. My concern with after the passage of this bill, that number is going to increase. And it seems, I'm not, again, trying to be overly dramatic about this, but you are empowering the poll watcher and making it more difficult for the poll worker to take any kind of discipline against that poll watcher should he or she have some misconduct of some sort. And I don't think it's fair because a lot of these election workers, many of them are retired. They're, retired folks who are looking for a little extra income or just wanting to be a part of the election process. And I know in some cases it's been very difficult to staff the early voting locations and then polling places on election day.
Are you concerned what these poll watchers can do specifically in communities of color? I mean, the state of Texas has had an interesting history on race and how it's impacted the elections and how it's impacted voter rights, access to the poll. How are you concerned that this bill will impact communities of color? Harris County is very diverse. It does have areas that are rural, unincorporated. Tell us a little bit about what you're concerned about in this bill specifically and how it may impact communities of color.
Well, Senator Blanco, as you know, in our communities, there could be, language barrier. That voter may not understand what the role of the poll watcher is. And with this new language that the poll watcher can be close to the interaction of the voter and the election judge or the clerk, that could be intimidating to that person who, with a language barrier, may not comprehend or understand what that person is doing there, because that is unusual. And as Dean Whitmire and I were talking about, the current language of conveniently close is sufficient. So I have many concerns about this whole poll watcher business in this bill.
Well, I appreciate you talking in detail about these issues because this is the third round of this discussion, and clearly I think that we heard testimony from hundreds of Texans that were the majority of those folks that came and testified here at the Capitol were against this legislation. And I appreciate the dialogue and the exchange that we had today to put these issues on the record. And with that, I yield to Senator Alvarado.
Thank you. And Madam President, I will continue with the testimony that was from Ms. Ashley Chang. She goes on to say, as the fastest growing demographic in the state. We have a long way to go and unique barriers to voting that need to be addressed, like language access and allowing more assistance to the polls. According to APIA Vote, 79% of Asian Americans in Texas speak a language other than English at home. And of those, more than 40% speak English less than very well. Turnout is 9% lower for limited English proficient, LEP is what it's known as, than non-LEP registered voters. 63% say that Asian language support at polling places would be useful. We need a voting system that actually matches our values of freedom and innovation as Texans. I urge you to prioritize safety and secure online voter registration, automatic voter registration, and universal and secure vote by mail. But instead, Senate Bill 1 bans drive-through voting. We are the home of Whataburger Texans. Texans love drive-throughs.
Senator Gutierrez, for what purpose? Senator, for what purpose?
Will the gentlelady yield?
Senator Alvarado, do you yield?
Madam Chair, I will yield for questions as long as it does not remove me from the floor.
Thank you. Senator, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Senator, I appreciate you, and I appreciate what you're trying to do and discuss tonight. And certainly hearing from all the folks back home in a digital age does give us a greater opportunity to be able to ask these questions in a marked way. My questions today specifically are going to discuss the bill, and I don't mean to in any way suggest to you or get ahead of you on any particular thing. Well, my question number one is, you heard the author of the bill suggest to us earlier this evening that this bill is about, there's a portion on ballot harvesting, and that's something certainly that none of us want. Made a big deal about it, didn't he?
Yes, and I know that the harvesting issue has been a real point of contention with you. And Senator Gutierrez, since you're up here, earlier I was reading a testimony from, I believe, one of your constituents from Barrett County. So I want them to know that you were here, present, and accounted for.
And my questions to you with regard to this are really not to talk about harvesting, but to suggest to you that this is a 22-page bill, is it not?
You are correct.
Would it surprise you to know that there's only 2.5 pages, arguably 3, on voter harvesting?
Yes.
And so I'm in the Texas Senate. I can't say the word, what the letters BS indicate, because I'm in the Texas Senate now. But we gotta cull the nonsense that we hear. We've been hearing a lot about this bill is about making it harder to cheat. Is that, I don't know what their phrase is from the right wing.
I'm not advised.
Harder to cheat, what is it? Harder to cheat, something like this, I don't know. But at the end of the day, what this bill is really trying to do is shave points in close elections. Isn't that right?
I would agree with that.
Because let's see and realize how we started down this road. And I don't even say it was in January. This road to perdition started right after the November election, did it not?
That's correct.
And it started when the guy that lost the election started telling everybody in the United States, oh, the election was stolen, the election was stolen. Did it not?
That's correct.
And yet, time after time, audit after audit, Republican elected officials in state after state, Republican secretaries of state have proven, have testified, have clearly illustrated, articulated, and enunciated that the election of 2020 was a fair and valid election.
Absolutely. Even our own Secretary of State, who is no longer in that position.
And so here we are in an elections bill that the opposing party says it's necessary, even though we hear about this session after session. It is always the mail-in ballot boogeyman, the voter harvesting boogeyman, you name it. Mail fraud boogeyman. And yet, in this last year, our Attorney General spent 22,000 man-hours for only 16 cases of alleged voter fraud.
I am very much aware of that.
And in most of those cases, let's be really clear. And so for the Republican constituency that is out there listening, and I hope it's many, and I hope it's vast, that you are listening here tonight. Because I don't think you're dumb, Republican voters. But you're being bamboozled. It was 16 alleged cases, but in the majority of those cases, it was essentially people like Mrs. Mason or Miss Mason that thought they were going to vote and could vote and somehow were ineligible. Isn't that correct?
That is absolutely 100% correct.
So I am glad you're doing this today because I want to dissect this bill with you. Is that okay with you?
That is perfectly fine.
Because I want to cut the crap. I want to get to the point. I want to tell the Republican constituency that's listening, and I hope you're many and vast, that your party has failed you. Because instead of talking about the things that we should be talking about, Winter Storm Uri and other things, we're talking about this charade. Isn't that right?
That is correct. So many issues
Senator
staring
Nichols,
us
for what purpose?
in our face.
Are we talking about the bill, or are we talking about election results and things that led up after the November? That's a question.
What about the bill? We're talking about
I haven't heard him talk about the bill for a while.
Well, we'll get right to it. We're talking about the bill.
Chair will ask Senator Gutierrez to phrase questions about pertaining to the bill, please.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Senator Nichols.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Thank you. Let's dissect this bill. Let's start with page 1. Because we've been hearing a lot about voter fraud. The other thing that we've heard about this bill today, Senator Nichols, others, the other thing that we heard about this bill today, how many cases of fraud are we willing to accept, I think is what Senator Hughes has suggested when he talked about this bill today. Well, my response to that is apparently it's 16 cases where people wrongly voted.
I think that's the number.
And here's the deal. How many votes are you, Senator Alvarado, or anybody else in this room, how many votes are we willing to suppress?
One.
Your number.
One is too many, Senator Gutierrez.
I absolutely, completely agree with you. So let's talk about the complexities of this bill that supposedly is all about fraud. Page 1, line 46, section D1. That seems to be the portion of this bill that adds new language, correct?
That is correct. Yes, starting on line 46. Yes.
So I'm going to read you this section of this bill, then I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
If the notice indicates that a voter no longer resides in the county in which the voter is registered, the registrar shall forward the notice and the voter's application for registration to the registrar of the county in which the voter resides. So that implies, Senator Alvarado, a collaboration between two different voter registrars in two different counties, does it not?
Yes.
And so this is brand new language, correct?
Yes, it is. It is new language, and the rest of that, remainder of that page is new.
The registrar shall, the registrars, plural, shall coordinate to ensure that the voter's existing registration is canceled immediately after the voter is registered in the county in which the voter resides in accordance with subsection D2. Again, this particular second sentence, again, implicates that two separate voter registrars in two separate counties will be coordinating together, correct?
That's correct.
New language that is requiring additional work to be done, additional labor to be performed, additional unfunded mandates to be brought upon our counties that heretofore had not existed, correct?
That is correct.
A registrar, who I call your attention to line 54, section D2. A registrar who receives a voter's notice and application from another registrar under section D1 shall treat it as an original application for registration under section 13002 and shall register the voter if the voter resides in the county and is otherwise eligible under section 1301. Yet again, another section of new language, correct?
That's correct.
That requires two different voter registrars to collaborate.
Yes.
Two new unfunded mandates on two separate counties brought upon by the state of Texas in this proposed legislation that is supposedly all about voter fraud.
That's correct, and that's not the only unfunded mandate. As you'll see in the rest of the bill, there are others.
Anything on that first page to you that indicates that this bill is anything about voter fraud, at least on the first page? Is there any indication to you?
Absolutely, and not only that, but I will draw your attention to the, when it talks about existing statewide computerized voter registration list, I would wish that we'd have some form of online, straight up online voter registration.
Right, because you and I have always talked about opening up the franchise of voters. We often refer to it as a franchise, don't we? The idea of voting.
That's right.
The reason we suggest it is because it is something that we want to give people opportunity to go do. And certainly it's their civic right to do.
Correct.
And their civic responsibility to do. But nothing on the first page indicates anything about voter harvesting, anything about voter fraud. It is simply making it harder for voter registrars in two separate counties and adding another obstacle towards the path of registering people to vote and maintaining their voting rolls. Correct?
Absolutely correct.
I direct you now to page 2, line 1. Notice of unlawful voting or registration.
I'm sorry, which line are you on?
Line 1.
Okay. Oh, okay, yes.
If the registrar determines that a person is not eligible to vote, to register, to vote, or voted in an election, the registrar shall, well, they deleted a section. They're not a registered voter, that's a section they deleted. Shall execute and deliver to the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, and the county or district attorney having jurisdiction in the territory covered by the election an affidavit stating the relevant facts. Now, this doesn't appear to be a new requirement that we're imposing on counties.
Correct.
But it certainly does appear to be more labor and more, actually it is. It's an additional step that our voter registrars have to do to comply with an unnecessary bill. Correct?
Absolutely.
I was wondering when we'd get to the citizenship part. Do you remember a nice man? He really was nice. And we were both freshman members of the legislature. Leo Berman. Does that name ring a bell?
Oh, yes.
Boy, every session we did something on voter fraud or something like that, or that, at least that was the allegation from the other side. And everything always was, except for Mexicans, except for illegal immigrants. He loved to say illegal aliens. He loved to say it. I love Leo. We actually got to be very good friends. I was wondering when we would get to a section on citizenship. So line 18, section on page 2, it says, or notification of persons who indicate a lack of citizenship status in connection with a motor vehicle or Department of Public Safety record as provided. And again, this is about notification to, I guess, the Department of Public Safety. Is that right?
That's correct, and you'll see they're mentioned throughout the bill.
And yet here again, another unfunded mandate passed on to the voters of Texas, to the taxpayers of Texas, on an unnecessary bill, and I guess the foil are persons that may or may not have citizenship. On line 29 of page 2, we have another brand new section. It really is too bad that Senator Hughes is not here to defend himself. because we heard time and time again this evening that there's voter fraud that is rampant throughout the state of Texas. We heard how many cases of voter fraud are enough. And yet, when I ask him, how many votes are you willing to suppress? I get no answer from him. But again, he suggests that this bill is about voter fraud, but really it sounds like it's a lot of unfunded mandates. So, line 29, and here's my question. It reads as follows. The Secretary of State shall enter into an agreement with DPS under which information in the existing statewide computerized voter registration list is compared against information in the database of the Department of Public Safety on a monthly basis to verify the accuracy of citizenship status information previously provided on voter registration applications. So now it looks like we have a state agency, which is DPS, and a state agency, which is clearly the Secretary of State's office, correct?
Correct, yes.
And now we have added yet another unfunded mandate that our Republican friends want to impose on our counties and our agencies, correct?
That is correct.
And these things don't magically happen, do they? I mean,
absolutely not. And I'm glad you're pointing this out because people talk about less government, right? And the hypocrisy is this is involving so much more government, so much more Big Brother.
I used to have a friend, I think a friend of yours too, a Republican colleague. I still have him. He is still my friend, Gary Elkins. You remember Representative Elkins?
I sure do.
He was still is a heck of a friend, a good conservative, and he used to tell me, Roland, I'd go home and they'd ask me, Gary, how come you didn't pass any bills this session? And he'd tell his constituents, he says, there's three kind of bills out there, those that tax you, those that regulate you, and those that take away your liberty, and I didn't think you wanted any one of those. Those are not very good bills, are they? Those bills that take away your liberty, those that tax you, and those that regulate you like this one does, right?
Absolutely.
And so when we get to the nut cutting on this one, in this section, we have another unfunded mandate that will cost taxpayers more to continue a ruse that somehow an election was stolen. Is that accurate?
That is very accurate. Thank you.
Would you like me to continue going through the bill?
Absolutely. You're doing such a great job, and I know you enjoy this.
Rules for the administration of this section. In line 43 of page 2, it says, the Secretary of State shall prescribe rules for the administration of this section. When this bill was being drafted, we have something called a bill analysis, do we not?
Absolutely, and I happen to have that bill analysis here that I may get to later.
And I look forward to your recitation later on about the bill analysis in this case. But I wonder how many new FTEs will be imposed on the people of Texas on a ruse, on a charade, on a facade of nothingness. I wonder how many new employees the Secretary of State has to hire, how many new employees the Department of Public Safety has to hire. Do you have any recollection of how many new employees will be brought on by this bill?
Senator Gutierrez, I have no idea, but as I would listen to the bill, as we have debated this bill numerous times, I too wondered how many. And when we are in some very unpredictable economic times, we're facing a pandemic, we've had an economic downturn, that I don't believe we have just a limitless amount of funds to bring in more and more FTEs. So I'm so glad you raised that point, because again, we're talking about unfunded mandates, bringing in more FTEs. I mean, this bill invites so much more government into the state of Texas.
I'm beginning to think that my Republican colleagues are sounding like the party of big government, not the party of limited government that they've pretended to be all these years. But I am a minimalist, and I am a small c conservative, and I believe that government should, Abraham Lincoln, are you aware that Abraham Lincoln said that the legitimate object of government is to do for the people that for which they cannot do for themselves, including elections?
That's correct.
And as Senator Brian Hughes suggested earlier today in his recitation, certainly it is our job to correct bills, to fix things when they've gone wrong. But at the end of the day, I'm not still sure how much has really gone wrong other than we offended Donald Trump. But I regress. Let's get back to line 62 of this new bill that we're proposing here today. And we have more new language.
Absolutely, I see that.
The Attorney General, who shall quarterly review the information to investigate whether a person has committed an offense under Section 1307 or other law. So now, get this, monthly, DPS and the Secretary of State's office with their brand new employees that they've had to bring in to keep up with this nonsense at the cost of millions to taxpayers, monthly. Now this section indicates that the Attorney General's office, yet a third agency, now has to quarterly review their information. Did they think that the Department of Public Safety is committing fraud upon us?
Yeah, again, you're raising another great point, because we're now involving many more agencies when it comes to our election process. So somewhere embedded in all of this, we know that they're adding FTEs, increasing budget to various agencies, and we already know about the 22,000 hours spent by the Attorney General's office investigating election fraud and ended up nowhere, dead end.
Do they not trust the governor's own appointed Secretary of State? Do they not trust that person?
Well, I'm glad you raised that issue, because the former Secretary of State, and keyword being former Secretary of State, said that the election process in 2020 was fair, was transparent, no complaints. And magically, poof, she's gone.
Their own governor-appointed Republican Secretary of State suggested that there was no voter fraud in the 2020 election in Texas, and now she is gone.
Gone. Hasta la vista, baby. Sayonara. Adios. Yeah, gone. Yes.
And yet, Senator Hughes and others would have us believe today that we need some new legislation, that we need some new rules, we need some new unfunded mandates, apparently. We need some new full-time employees, correct? And not only
I believe I heard something along those lines.
And not only do we need that, but we need, by God, we need DPS doing a monthly deal along with the Secretary of State, and the Attorney General, by God, now has to check on their homework.
Well, and not to mention the 2 deputy registrar offices now, so that's bringing in, the local government, but not 1, but 2 registrar offices.
Right. Well, I believe we've kind of done a good job on pages 1 and 2. Let's go.
I'm sure we can find more big government in here somewhere.
Oh, there's plenty to go. Now I'm going to direct your attention to page 3. I owe an apology to Senator Hughes. He kept saying, read the bill, read the bill. to his credit, to his point, I read all the bullet points on this bill. I smelled the mendacity in this bill. What did they say in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof? I smell the mendacity.
I'm not quite sure of the exact
I
words.
smell the odor of mendacity in the room. I think that's what he said. And so now I'm reading this bill, and I'm right. There's nothing in this, there's very little in this bill about voter harvesting or anything of the like. There's a whole lot of big government. So now I direct you to page 3.
Okay. I'm on page 3.
Another new section. Referral to the Attorney General. If after receiving or discovering information indicating that a criminal conduct, interesting, because we get rid, our author Hughes, eliminates the word complaint alleging. So he eliminates the process by which we perform the daily function of our judiciary criminal process. In other words, Senator, isn't it true here that he is eliminating the necessity for a criminal complaint? Essentially,
Yes.
if he thinks in his mind criminal conduct occurred, if anybody does, just the mere thought, you can refer that case to the Attorney General under this new law.
Yeah, again, we're inviting another state agency into the process. You have duly noted that. Thank you.
But not only do we have unfunded mandates, not only do we have more FTEs, now this supposed beautiful piece of legislation is eliminating the core of our criminal justice process and circumventing that with a mere innuendo. I think Carol Alvarado cheated in this election. I'm going to refer that case, and I'm going to call Ken Paxton.
Okay.
Does that sound fair? Does that sound right to you?
Not in my book.
I wish the Attorney General that was so quick to indict some woman for giving pens, keychains, and calendars was quick enough to indict the people that hired her. The Secretary shall deliver to the Attorney General all pertinent documents and information in the Secretary's possession. The documents and information submitted under subsection are not considered public information until. Let's get on to the middle of page 3 where we have, yet again, new language, large swaths of new language, many lines. We'll start on line 33 to provide context for the folks listening at home. And to my Republican friends at home, I remind you that there's not a whole lot of voter fraud in this particular bill. A lot of big government. Line 30 says, on the third business day of each month, the clerk shall send a copy of the list of persons excused or disqualified in the previous month because the persons do not reside in the county to, 1, here's the new language, the voter registrar of the county, the Secretary of State, and the Attorney General, and the county or district attorney for an investigation of whether the person committed an offense under Section 1307. I'll be damned here. So now, you talk about redundancies. You talk about extra work, you talk about more full-time employees. Are you aware, Senator Alvarado, that in the middle of this page, on page 3, are you aware of the fact that this supposition that maybe Carol or Cesar or Kel Seliger or anybody sitting in this room here today if I sense, or if maybe I'm just his opposition candidate, I say, hey, Kel's cheating. Maybe I say that, right? And that referral, then on the third business day of each month, the clerk, presumably of the registrar's clerk, you have to send to the voter registrar of the county, the Secretary of State of Texas, the Attorney General, and the county or the district attorney for the investigation. More unfunded mandate, is it not?
You're correct. I see that. It seems like this just keeps piling and piling on more of our state agencies to be involved in this election process.
It's certainly. Before I go on with the components of the bill, I want to talk about Houston, because we've talked to the authors of this bill have mentioned that a lot of things were happening in Houston, Texas. That is your hometown, is it not?
It is, and that has a lot to do with why I chose to stand here and filibuster this bill.
And you've done a damn good job.
Thank you.
And the people of Houston, thank you for it. And the people of Houston, because of COVID-19, were allowed to vote in drive-through settings, correct?
That's correct.
This bill makes it illegal to have any more drive-through voting, correct? Does this bill outlaw drive-through voting?
Unfortunately, it does.
And yet there was not one proof of one iota, of one infinitesimal shred of evidence that any fraud occurred in the drive-through voting, correct?
That's correct. And in the drive-through voting, there were over 128,000 people in Harris County, the third largest county in the country and the largest county in this state.
I don't want you to be offended. I sometimes refer to Houston as the Pittsburgh of Texas. I happen to like Pittsburgh.
I'm going to try not to be offended.
I refer to it as the Pittsburgh of Texas because it is a central place for our dock workers. It is a place where industry thrives. It is an industrial backbone in our oil and gas sector and energy sectors. And a lot of shift, S-H-I-F-T.
I got it. I knew exactly what you were
A lot of shift.
pronouncing.
A lot of shift workers
Yes.
voted
Shift workers.
in those drive-through voting facilities, right?
That is correct.
Senator Hughes would have us believe, I wish he were here right now, Senator Hughes would have us believe that somehow a bunch of shift workers got in a car and voted at 3 in the morning and they were, hey, who are you voting for? And they cheated off of each other. God knows what. I don't even know what the problem is with regard to drive-through voting. Do you?
Well, no, I don't. And nobody has really been able to give me a sufficient answer. Our county, with a bipartisan group of individuals, Democrats and Republicans, came up with this concept, signed off on this concept. And yet, you didn't hear anybody complain about it to the degree that now it's about to be outlawed in a bill.
And we're getting to that part right here about tents and movable structures. This bill reminds me of a great big pile of shift. A great big pile of shift. I love S-H-I-F-T, shift workers, of which the city of Houston has many of, the Pittsburgh of Texas.
Mr. President.
For what purpose?
To ask Senator Gutierrez a question. Or to raise a question to the presiding officer, is the freshman senator phrasing questions, or is he just throwing out?
Sounds like he's talking about the Houston workers right now.
Well, can we ask the freshman
May I
senator to
respond
ask
to the
questions?
chairman, to the president?
Do what?
May I respond to the president, to you?
Not really.
Fair enough. I believe I've asked questions in every one of my recitations, sir.
You were working it page by page, but it sounded like you kind of got off a little bit. But
Okay, we'll get right back to it. But in all fairness,
and try to be respectful.
I will. Oh, I have been to the body for sure.
Down on the edge.
Have I been disrespectful, Mr. President? I believe there's a censorship in the rules if I've been disrespectful to anybody in this room.
No, you got kind of on the edge of things that sounded very similar to other things. Thank you.
Very good, because I respect you immensely, sir. And I respect the chair of finance immensely. And I respect the dean of the delegation immensely. And most importantly, I respect the shift workers of the state of Texas immensely. Thank you, Mr. President, for that admonishment. I wish I was. I feel like they've dimmed the lights in here. Either that or I'm getting old, which is probably the case. On page 3, line 50, that is where we begin to talk about some of the polling places and structures. I'll direct you to line 50. It says, each polling place shall be located inside a building except as provided by subsection B1. A polling place may not be located in a tent or similar temporary movable structure or in a facility primarily designed for motor vehicles. To my point, Senator Alvarado, did the city of Houston incorporate similar type buildings that this legislation is seeking to outlaw?
That is correct. That was something that was challenged, as you know. And, for example, there was drive-through voting in the Toyota Center where our Houston Rockets play, in the garage of the Toyota Tundra. And so, there was a lot of talk about this. And if I recall, Senator Eckhart, I know, raised this issue. We've talked about this bill so much, I can't remember if we were in a hearing or we were in caucus or we were on the floor about, in her district, in a parking lot of, I don't know if it was H-E-B or a grocery store or something, a mobile trailer that would have been impacted. And I don't know if that issue got resolved. But anyway, go on.
It suggests here that no voter may cast a vote from inside a motor vehicle unless the voter meets the requirements of Section 64009. Presumably, Section 64009 is about disabled voters that can't access the voting booth, correct?
That's correct.
And presumably what this new section of this bill, it simply outlawed the facilitations that were created by Harris County. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Does that seem fair to you?
No.
Does that seem like it is intended at curbing fraud or shaving votes?
Well, look, there was no fraud proven or even, to my knowledge, alleged in this voting process. Clearly. I believe it worked very well.
Clearly. And so it would seem to me, and I would hope that you would agree, that this is simply a manner by which this legislation has been created to shave or cut votes or disenfranchise people from their democratic right that they're entitled to.
Yes, and also let's talk about the taking away the flexibility from our county officials. And I know that the Constitution says that, that the state governs the elections, but yet we have county administrators that have responsibility of running the elections. And somewhere in the debate today, somebody talked about a not one size fits all. Harris County is a very large county, so what will work there may not work in a small county in East Texas. So this part of going after Harris County, quite frankly, is taking away their flexibility, their local control. I'm concerned that we are in the midst of another rise in the pandemic. And who knows what it will be like during our primaries. And these conveniences will no longer be in place.
You hit the nail right on the head. In all due respect to my Republican colleagues, and all kidding aside, the thing I respected most about my friends, I know who you are. When Senator Colhorst, then Representative, say it 5 times, then Representative Colhorst back in the day, used to school a young man who she just lovingly called Gutierrez, among other things. Back in those days, what I respected most about my friends was their insistence on local control. And in here, on line 55 of page 3, it says a polling place may be located in a tent or similar temporary movable structure only if a building selected for a polling place is later determined by the county commissioner's court to be not reasonably accessible due to fire, flood, or other natural disaster. And it goes on. But doesn't it seem clear here that this piece of legislation is now having Big Brother, the state of Texas, telling Harris County and Bexar County and any other county, hey, little brother, little sister, I'm going to show you how to run your election, because I don't like the way you're running your election, because you're getting too many voters out there. Isn't that right?
That has been my thing all along. In fact, I used the phrase Big Brother earlier. If a process invited more people to vote, 10,000 people, over 10,000 people utilizing the 24-hour voting, and 128,000 using the drive-through voting, and by the way, 60% of them were women. Yeah, if you're taking away something that was proven to be successful and brought more people out, but now you're trying to do away with that, you're suppressing it, you're putting your hand on it.
This bill is the damnedest thing, because here at the end of page 3 on line 69, it says that if the court, County Commissioner's Court in Harris County, says we're going to do this temporary building, well, then you got to send a record of that determination, continue line 1, page 4, to the Secretary of State as soon as practicable. So if the county says this building caught on fire and I now have to do the portable building, I have to send notice to the state of Texas, hey, I did this. Come on. Too much Big Brother. What happened to local control, right?
Yes, and it's a lot of things that have been brought before this body have impeded on local control. You think about in Houston, along the Gulf Coast, we've had hurricanes, tropical storms that can knock the electricity out of a building. And say you're in the middle of an election and all you may be able to secure immediately would be a tent or something that would be contrary to this language.
Page 4, opening and closing the polling place for voting immediately before opening the polls for voting on the first day of early voting and on election day. The presiding election judge or alternate election judge shall confirm that each voting machine has any public counter, I think there's a typo there, reset to 0 and shall print the tape that shows the counter was set to 0 for each candidate or measure on the ballot. Yet again, new language in this new presumed bill about fraud that so far I haven't seen much about fraud other than telling little brother what to do, little sister what to do. So again, this seems to be an issue of local control, does it not?
You're absolutely correct.
Well, I think the county should be clear that the Democrats in the Texas Senate certainly want local control. Section C, immediately after closing the polls for voting on election day, the presiding election judge or alternate election judge shall print the tape or show votes cast for each candidate or ballot measure. Again, this is new language. I'm not going through the entirety of the bill. I'm going through the amendments, the additions, certain deletions from time to time that seem to indicate that this is substantially more control of local elections by the state of Texas.
I would agree with that.
This is one that I'm concerned with from our small county's perspective. On line 30, vote tabulating equipment, beginning January 1st, 2024. Equipment to tabulate votes may not be used if any wireless connectivity capability of the equipment has not been disabled or removed. That may, I don't know, difficult for some counties to do, smaller counties especially, when you're mandating certain machines.
I share your concern.
And so, perhaps, just maybe, just perhaps, not only is this an unfunded mandate, but it is an unfunded mandate to small counties across the state of Texas that simply cannot afford changes in these unknown times. On page 4, line 36, there's a section called polling place checklists. Again, no mention of real fraud here. We're just telling county clerks that they have to follow these checklists. The Secretary of State shall adopt rules and create a checklist or similar guidelines to assist the presiding judge of a polling place in processing forms and conducting procedures required by this code at the opening and closing of the polling place. Here again, now we're having the Secretary of State tell each and every county, and that may or may not be a bad thing, I don't know, but no mention of fraud in any of this, right?
That's correct.
On line 47, delivery by the election clerk, and it's a chain of custody. There's a subsection B, which is all new language. If the presiding judge of a polling place designates a clerk to deliver election supplies, the presiding judge shall attest to the designation, and the clerk shall attest to the clerk's acceptance of the responsibility. The Secretary of State shall create and promulgate a form to facilitate compliance with this section. I have no earthly idea what this section is about.
I'm glad you said that.
I can only presume that this is about false images, about things being brushed under tables in like Ohio or something that were proven to just be nothing, empty boxes, I think. A little picayune, is it not? A little picky.
Yes. Nitpicking.
Nitpicking.
Not neat picking, but nit.
Nitpicking. Unfunded mandate.
Another one.
I apologize. I, like my friend from Mineola, have a bit of a drawl. When I was a child, I only spoke Spanish. But then I watched a lot of Western movies, and then this happened. Regular days and hours for voting. Oh, this was the good one. Thankfully, our good friend from Mineola, Senator Hughes, got rid of the language with regard to souls to the polls on Sundays, correct?
That is correct.
And thankfully, they allowed counties to do that which, to prescribe the hours of operation that they wanted to prescribe rather than have them prescribed to them, correct?
That is also correct.
I'll tell my absent senator, thank you. Thank you for making a change. It's important to the people of District 19 on the southeast side of San Antonio, where I have a very large African American community that expects me to advocate for them. They're a community that is very active in voting. They're a community that was very offended by the language. They were even more offended by the recitations of some people in this building that it was a typo, and the recitations of others that suggested we want to give people a chance to go have lunch. And so the people of the southeast side of Houston are glad that you and I advocated for them on behalf, as well as all our colleagues, to make the changes. I'll direct you now to page 5, line 20. Actually, let me direct you to page 5, line 5. In a county with a population of 30,000 or more, the voting in a primary election or the general for state and county officers shall be conducted at the main early voting polling place for at least 12 hours on each weekday of the last weekday of the early voting period, and the voting in a special election ordered by the governor shall be conducted at the main 2 days for at least 12 hours. Voting under this section may not be conducted earlier than 6 a.m. and no later than 9 p.m. I'm going to direct you, my questioning, to what happened in the last election cycle, where the city of Houston, Harris County, and even in Bexar County, we had a 24-hour voting place. Did you have a 24-hour voting place?
We sure did, and as I was stating earlier, more than 10,000 people utilized that. Back to our first responders, our shift workers as well.
We opened up the franchise of voting by doing so, and yet this masterful, horrible piece of legislation goes back in time, puts us in the reverse gear, and says, we don't want any more voters. We don't want any extra voters. And yet in Houston, you got more people out to the polls because of the facilitations that were made, in large part due to COVID. But you did it, correct? More people voted?
Yes.
And by the way, not more Democrats voted. More people voted. More Texans voted. More Americans, more humans. And yes, if we want to just dissect it even further, more Democrats voted and more Republicans voted in Harris County.
Yes.
More than ever before.
Yes, we broke records.
You broke records. Both parties broke records. Yet, this bill seeks to disenfranchise and take people's ability to vote at the time of their choosing away. What was the rationale that we heard on this particular instance? Was it not that they were real concerned that they couldn't get poll workers to work at a certain time?
I believe that may have been one of the responses, among others.
Did the city of Houston have any problem getting poll workers to work at those times? Harris County?
No, not big. Well, at that time, not so much, because we were in the pandemic. Many people had been laid off of work, lost their jobs. So that wasn't quite as big of an issue as what some have stated.
At the bottom of the page, we start to get into a section that says on line 67, if a suitable room is unavailable inside the branch office, the polling place may be located in another room inside the same building as the branch office. Except as provided by Section A1, the polling place may not be located in a tent or similar temporary movable structure or parking garage, parking lot, or similar facility designed primarily for motor vehicles. Yet again, another recitation against Harris County for facilitating drive-through voting, correct?
That's correct.
And this has to do with early voting. Same recitations. I won't waste the time of my colleagues going over the subsequent 20 lines of new law, none of which, Senator Hughes, none of which suggest anything that there is any suggestion or mention of voter fraud or people cheating. Just more big government, more eliminating, disenfranchising people from voting. When we come down on page 6 to line 38, a temporary branch polling place may be located in a tent or similar temporary movable structure if a building selected for a temporary branch voting place is later determined by the county commissioners to be not reasonably accessible due to fire. Again, this is more of the same on early voting. And yet, more language towards the bottom of the page says you've got to let the Secretary of State know of any changes that you might have made. Again, it would appear to be that this bill is not only disenfranchising voters, but it would appear that it's causing more unfunded mandates and more things, more obstacles for counties and voter registrars of counties to have to undergo, correct?
You're absolutely correct, and as you said earlier, we don't know how many new FTEs will have to be hired by the Secretary of State, DPS, Attorney General, and God knows who else.
This is a long section of new law, but I feel that we must read it. It's about 15 lines together.
Which line are you on?
It's on page 7, because again, there's new law in here that establishes more unfunded mandates. And so the questions that need to be answered by you for our voters, really they should be questions to Senator Hughes, who suggests to us that this is all about fraud, but it seems to me it's about making it harder for counties to run elections. The general custodian, line 3, section 7. The general custodian of election records in a county with a population of less than 100,000 may, and the general custodian of election records in a county with a population of 100,000 or more shall implement a video surveillance system that retains a record of all areas containing voted ballots. Now, I'm going to direct you to our last Secretary of State's comments. What did she say about fraud in the 2020 elections?
Well, she said there was no fraud. And like I said, now she's no longer there.
The Republican Secretary of State appointed by Governor Greg Abbott said there was no fraud, and she is no longer there. But now our counties, our large counties, shall implement a video surveillance system that retains a record of all areas containing voted ballots. Who's going to pay for that? Harris County or the Secretary of State?
I'm not quite sure.
There's nothing in this bill that suggests that the Secretary of State is going to send money down to our counties, is there?
No.
There was nothing that we passed during this session that suggested that the Secretary of State was going to pass any money to our counties. As a matter of fact, there was a bill where the counties that were given monies to expand and perform better elections as donations, they couldn't even accept those dollars, correct?
That is correct.
So not only do we have another unfunded mandate here, we have a situation where we're requiring video surveillance system of of areas where the ballots are kept, which is just, I generally don't have a problem with it, but the sheer amount of money that it could take is simply not even prescribed and unknown, quite frankly. From the time the voted ballots are delivered to the central counting station until the canvass of a precinct election returns, and from the time the voted ballots are delivered to the signature verification committee or early voting ballot board until the canvass of precinct election returns. Subsection C, a video from a system implemented under subsection B may be made available to the public by a live stream in a county with a population of less than 100,000 and shall be made available live stream in a county of 100,000 or more. Now the county has to live stream the stuff. We have to get videographers in Bexar County, in Harris County. Does that seem fair to your taxpayers?
Absolutely not. And I guess, again, along the lines of unfunded mandates, it's another one we're piling on.
Senator Hughes ever suggest to us that he was going to add an additional $100 million for our counties? Did he ever suggest to us that there's any money in this bill?
Not to my knowledge.
Senator Eckhart, I know, will have some questions for you later. And in her experience as a county judge, she'll be able to tell you how much elections cost. The video recorded is an election record under section 1012 and shall be retained by the general custodian of election records until the end of the calendar year in which an election is held or until an election contest filed in this county has been resolved. So now there is a custodial requirement. Yet again, another unfunded mandate. I'd hate, if you want me to stop at any point, please tell me.
I think you're doing a fine job. You're pretty good at it.
Well, I think that it's important that Republican voters and Democratic voters alike know the truth about this bill. This bill has had a lot of talking points, a lot of sound bites, has it not?
You're absolutely right.
But when you started doing this today, I thought, man, this woman is crazy. How long is she going to talk here? I want to go home and see my kids. But now I have to thank you for doing it. Because as you're aware, filibusters are really more apt to be successful towards the end of a session. And many times they've stopped bad legislation from happening. But you and I, unfortunately, don't have that kind of time because we're on day 5 of a 30-day special. Is that not correct?
That is correct. And the history of filibustering in the Texas Senate, there have been, at least that we could find, 106 filibusters done. And a very small percentage of them, actually 27%, were done in a way to kill a bill. So that means the majority, 72%, were used to do what we are doing right now.
And let me keep you on point. Because what you've done today for us is you've allowed us the opportunity to illustrate for the public, point by point, page by page, this bill in ways that Senator Hughes, in all of his capacity as a legislator and litigator, and he's one of the most talented people I've ever seen. I dare say I don't wish that I ever end up, or I wish rather, that I never end up in a courtroom opposite Brian Hughes. I'd rather wish that someday we tried a case together. Boy, that would be fun. But you, by doing what you're doing and breaking down this bill for what it truly is, are showing the Texas public, Democrats and Republicans, that this is not about voter fraud. This is about point shaving. This is about disenfranchising voters. This is about keeping people away from the polls. This is about making it difficult for counties to run their elections. Isn't that correct?
You are 100 absolutely correct in that. And, you know, to do this at this stage in a special session, as you said, is not traditionally done. However, these are unprecedented times with extremely important legislation that the impacts are far and wide.
I believe they are. I want to direct your attention. Page 7, line 27, a section entitled Training Manual. Secretary of State shall publish and maintain a training manual for watchers and shall make the manual available on the Secretary of State's internet website. So now here we have another duty for the Secretary of State, which could require more FTEs, which could require more of an unfunded mandate for the people of the state of Texas. Is that not correct?
That is correct. And you may have heard the dialogue between Senator Blanco and I about the manual for the poll watchers. And in the bill, it says that the Secretary of State shall publish and maintain a training manual for watchers and shall make it available. Make it available. It's not saying that it's mandatory that they have to read the manual or take some exam. But I'll just call your attention back to the Secretary of State shall publish. I mean, publish. I don't know where that's coming from. Oh, it sounds like Boston more than a feeling.
Well, I guess that's the feeling.
I see my Marianne walking.
So maybe the feeling we're going to have when we finish tonight or when we go vote. Who knows?
Okay. So let me call your attention back to the
training manual.
Yes, the training, page 7, line 27. The Secretary of State shall publish. So how many counties are in our state? 254?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
ma'am.
Now, I don't know if they're going to have to publish for every county, but that costs money. That's paper. That's printing. That's somebody to assemble that, somebody to distribute them. That just doesn't happen magically. There's cost involved.
One of my favorite parts, and I agree with you. I just have to thank you because you've given us the opportunity to debunk this bill in its entirety. Quite frankly, an opportunity that we never had with such a great orator as Brian Hughes. Because, respectfully, Brian is probably one of the smartest people I know, but he loves to do that country bumpkin thing, and him and Hall, and kind of get you all confused. By the time you're done talking to Brian, he'll sell you a 20-year-old used car. He's just that good. So breaking down a bill page by page in the manner that you've done today for us, perhaps the best gift that we could have for the people of the state of Texas. And for those that say that this is about fraud, because it isn't. Line 36 says an election, this is an interesting new section. An election officer commits an offense if the officer intentionally or knowingly refuses to accept a watcher for service when acceptance of the watcher is required by this section. An offense under this section is a Class A misdemeanor. I've never seen a proud boy. I don't know what those folks look like. Honestly, I've never seen a poll watcher except for the folks that are outside the polls, and usually those are volunteers. Have you ever seen a poll watcher in the Houston area?
Yes, and I don't know if you caught the back and forth between myself and Dean Whitmire, but yeah, I think one of the most unattractive roles in the campaign process is the poll watcher, because you have to be very obedient the way it is now, what's on the books now. You have to sit and be quiet. You cannot get up. You have to have permission to talk. You have to get permission to walk around. So most people don't like to just sit there and be still. People want to be a poll worker where you can interact and engage with the voters, or to be outside and be a card pusher.
The bill almost seems to empower poll watchers to do a little bit more than watching, doesn't it?
Well, good point. So with this new language, they may be doing a lot more than watching. We may have to call it something else instead of poll watcher. Maybe poll watcher, poll talker, poll intimidator. I don't know.
Section, page 7, line 54, except as provided by subsection 3, a watcher, we could just say a proud boy, may not be denied free movement where election activity is occurring within the location at which the watcher is serving. A poll watcher may not be denied free movement at a location at which the poll watcher is serving. Do you think that this would be an impediment to the seniors that go vote in person, to the elderly that go vote in person? Do you think having a poll watcher at a poll site peering over their shoulder, because there's no delineation here, a poll watcher could peer over my shoulder, couldn't they?
You're absolutely right, and I'm really glad that you are honing in on this. We've talked about it a lot, Senator Blanco and myself, and Senator Dean Whitmire and myself, and now you and I are engaged in this free movement. That is quite a jump from what is law today. And that's the problem that so many of us have with that. What is free movement? Is that where you've got maybe the clerk here and the voter there, and the poll watcher comes over here and is free moving around? I mean, what is that? Again, I think it is inviting a potentially confrontational environment in the polling place.
I want Republican voters and Democrat voters alike, I want you to clarify in this next question. Line 57. In this code, a watcher who is entitled to quote-unquote observe an election activity is entitled to sit or stand near enough to see and hear that activity. Does it seem to you like in that instance, a large, very assuming, scary guy could stand behind me and watch my vote take place?
This opens it up for that and many other similar scenarios. I think the language that is law now, that's on the books now, conveniently close, is sufficient. I don't know what has triggered this, what has prompted this new language. I've never heard of people who were poll watchers who were needing or wanting to engage in what's described here in this bill on page
I want you to,
7,
Senator,
line 54.
I don't mean to stop you.
Yeah.
They took out, redacted the word conveniently. They added an entirely new section that says, a poll watcher is entitled to observe an election activity, is entitled to sit or stand near enough to see and hear the activity. My question to you is, if I'm standing behind, if I'm a poll watcher, and I'm standing behind Larry Taylor, the voter, could that be very intimidating for Larry when he goes to the polls? If I'm breathing down his neck?
Yeah. Well, I don't think Senator Taylor's easily intimidated, but if he is in a polling place, and voting is kind of a private matter. You don't want anybody, it's nobody's business.
But there's nothing in here to prohibit this from being a private matter. So we've been hearing all along, oh, poll watchers, no big deal. No big deal. I'm a little guy. Larry's my size too. What if Hulk Hogan is behind him, breathing down his throat, breathing down on the back of his neck? Could that be intimidating for voter Larry?
I think even for Mr. Taylor, it could be. I don't know.
Do you think?
But I suspect.
I have never, ever, in my whole 33 years of voting, have I ever seen a poll worker, not a watcher, I've never seen a poll worker do anything that is abhorrent, illegal, or in any way suspect. And so, if that place, that holy grail, that sacrosanct spot right there at the polling booth is my place to exercise my right, and I have Hulk Hogan behind me, breathing down my neck, why in the world is that even necessary?
Again, as I've stated time and time, over and over, that there is no foundation, there is no merit for this new language. I mean, we're going from conveniently near to now this free movement. They're entitled. The poll watcher is now entitled. Not only are they empowered, they're entitled to observe an election activity. So,
I'm not sure what the senatorial...
Entitled and empowered. Here we go.
I'm not sure what the senatorial way is, and I say this with respect, I do. But shame on anybody that would suggest that they would allow that on somebody that puts language in a bill that says that some goon can watch over me and my vote with me and my family. Because the persons that I have at the polling site, I bring in my little girl, my 11-year-old or my 14-year-old, and I take them to the booth, as I'm allowed to do. And I show them they can't touch anything. But I show them the process of democracy at work. But now I'm going to have some goon behind me, behind my kid. I'm sorry, fellas. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. And if you don't think it'll happen, just wait till the next election. Just wait. Section line 62 of page 7, observing data storage, sealing, and transfer. A watcher appointed to serve at a polling place in an election who is available at the time of the action may observe all election activities relating to closing the polling place, including the sealing and transfer of a memory card, flash drive, hard drive, data, storage, or other. And I don't generally have a problem with that section. Not that I don't want poll watchers, Senator Birdwell, in the building. Senator Colcourse, Senator Taylor. What I don't want are these people scaring my kid. And if you think that this bill doesn't have that, then it does, doesn't it, Senator Alvarado.
That is correct.
Senator Alvarado, I'm going to direct you to page 8, line 1. A watcher duly accepted for service at a polling location is entitled to follow the transfer of election materials from the polling place at which the watcher is accepted or any location designated to process election materials. The authority responsible for administrating a regional tabulating center or another location where election materials are processed must accept duly appointed watchers for service. I think that you and I can both agree that a section like this is generally fine. Is that correct?
I'd agree.
Because that's an administrative function, is it not?
Right.
Tabulating all the votes, entering in all the stuff in the computers, processing everything, sending it over to the central elections office, all the things and the nuts and bolts that happen in elections. And you and I can agree that that's okay, correct?
That's correct.
And so we can agree with Senator Hughes that that's okay. But under no circumstances should anybody be watching my vote, be breathing down my neck, be scaring my kid. And that's what this bill does, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
No fraud there, is there? So does it appear to you that this bill is more about vote shaving than actual fraud?
Well, I would say that, and it's, again, suppressing. It's, you know, the things that this bill is going after, keeping my county, for example, from doing things that have proven to be successful, that have attracted more voters. And when you stop that, you're suppressing.
You used a word that I have not used tonight, and the senator from Mineola often says, oh, this bill isn't about voter suppression. It's not about voter intimidation, but it is. We have a whole section here of voter suppression when we empower vote watchers, correct?
That's correct.
A person commits an offense if the person, line 13, page 8. A person commits an offense if the person serves in an official capacity at a location at which the presence of watchers is authorized and knowingly prevents a watcher from observing an activity or procedure the person knows a watcher is entitled to observe, including by taking any action to obstruct the view of a watcher or distance the watcher from the activity or procedure to be observed in a manner that would make observation not reasonably effective. Did you hear of any sort of obstruction of poll watchers at vote tabulating sites or at central offices in Harris County? Did you ever hear of anything of the sort?
No such thing.
Was there ever an article in the Houston Chronicle that suggested that people were not allowed to see tabulations of votes?
Not to my knowledge.
We heard things across the United States, we heard these accusations, but none of those were proven to be true. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And yet here we are, creating crimes if a poll worker gets, let's be clear, in the average course of business, when Senator Taylor walks towards his desk right now in a little while, and I'm in his way, and he's a poll watcher, and I get in his way as a poll worker, he could say, that poll worker obstructed my view. Could he not? Could he not?
Yes, absolutely.
And so here we've created a whole new offense for, I guess, taking any action to obstruct the view of a watcher. That is what cases in controversy are made of. That is what criminal complaints are made of, correct?
You are correct, Senator Gutierrez.
Poll watcher Joe Blow says, poll worker Carol Alvarado got in my way. I'm filing a criminal complaint. And we just allowed it right here, did we not?
We did, and you have to wonder how many of these complaints are going to be launched after this. And of course, you know, that adds another unfunded mandate that somebody may be involved with. Who's going to represent? I mean, if there's a complaint filed, who is going to pick up that tab?
You better be nice to your district attorney.
Yeah.
If your district attorney doesn't like you, he might proceed with such complaints. You better be nice to the Attorney General, I guess, because he could file these claims, can't he?
Yep.
God help us all. Relief. 923. A watcher or the appointing authority for a watcher who believes that the watcher was unlawfully prevented or obstructed from the performance of the watcher's duties may seek injunctive relief, may seek mandamus relief, or any other remedy under law. We are empowering people. We're empowering Proud Boys. Where is any part of this language? Where is there a search to prevent fraud? Where's the fraud here? All we've caused is an additional criminal cause of action, have we not?
You're absolutely right. And I was saying earlier, in another section of the bill, a page or two before, they're entitled to this. So again, it's entitling these poll watchers, it's empowering the poll watchers. And these poll watchers are going to sure hold a lot of power. And this could discourage people from wanting to work as election clerks.
We'll get this. The relief provided by this section is available to a state inspector appointed under Chapter 34 or any other election inspector authorized by law. So now it would appear that we have a new round of some kind of agency from somewhere. I don't know where these inspectors come from. I don't know if it's from DPS, the Secretary of State, or, you know, the X-Men. What I do know is that we're talking now about election inspectors appointed under Chapter 34. And, you know, pardon my ignorance, I'm sure under Chapter 34 it'll tell me where they come from.
Well, and we can just have somebody that's sitting along the rail, perhaps, look to see what that is, because I am curious about that as well. This, again, we can reread that line. The relief provided by this section is available to a state inspector appointed under Chapter 34. Okay.
Line 46. An in-person delivery of a marked ballot voted under this chapter must be received by an election official at the time of delivery. The receiving official shall record the voter's name, signature, the type of identification on a roster prescribed by the Secretary of State. The receiving official shall attest on the roster that the delivery complies with this section. Again, more of an unfunded mandate, nothing about fraud, just adding more work for the local county officials, correct?
Yes, I wish now, Senator Gutierrez, we had been keeping a tally of all these unfunded mandates or unexplained or non-descriptive sources or language in the bill where we're not sure who picks up the cost for this, like the manuals for the poll watchers, and then these inspectors here related to Chapter 34. Yeah.
Senator,
I don't know. Maybe somebody out there watching is keeping track how many times we have identified in this bill, going page by page, of unfunded mandates.
Senator, I have to thank you again for what you've done tonight and what you're going to continue to do tonight. Because if anything, what we have done together in some way, is illustrate for the public, Republicans and Democrat voters alike, that this bill is a bunch of hogwash It has nothing to do with voting fraud, but rather eliminating people from voting and disenfranchising voters. So with that, Senator, Mr. President, I'm going to allow Senator Eckhart to continue looking at the next several pages and anything else that she sees, and I hope and I know that she will talk about her experience as a county judge on those unfunded mandates and those expenses. You have done a great service for the people of the state of Texas, because we are going to be able to go through this bill page by page and truly
Well, thank you,
discover
Senator.
the mendacity of it.
Senator Gutierrez, before you leave, let me thank you, first of all. You have shed some very interesting light on the language of this bill. It's been very colorful. But let me share with you, your county, according to Bexar County Election Administrator, the bill would result in an estimated fiscal impact of $350,000 to $13 million. The most significant component of this estimate would be due to the required replacement of voting systems. The county states that the provisions of the bill related to video surveillance, you hit on that earlier, live streaming, and records retention would have significant costs that would vary by the number of elections held over the course of a year. According to your county, there would also be additional cost for reprinting new forms and envelopes, outreach for new ballot requirements, and providing processing for rejected voter applications.
Thank you, Senator.
I'm not sure if you were aware of that from your county, Bexar County.
I wasn't, and I should be, and I apologize.
Maybe those on the sidelines over here can get some more information from other counties. I'll just also share with you, Senator Gutierrez, that according to the Texas Association of Counties, I think you're familiar with them.
Yes.
The bill would have a significant fiscal impact of counties. Okay, according to Fort Bend County, the estimated fiscal impact of the bill would be between $200,000 and $12 million. The county states that the most significant component of this cost would be the replacement of voting systems to comply with the requirements of the bill at an estimated $9 to $12 million.
It would seem.
I'm sure you know people in Cameron County.
I do.
According to the Cameron County administrator, the bill would have an estimated annual fiscal impact of at least $250,000 and an additional cost of over $5 million for new equipment, the acquisition of surveillance equipment, and streaming and data storage.
And no new money from the state of Texas, a clear unfunded mandate for a bill that seeks to curb zero voter fraud.
Thank you so much for helping to continue to shine the light in greater detail, page by page, the impacts of this bill. And now we know that there are some pretty steep financial impacts. Thank you,
Senator, and thank you, Mr. President, for giving me this opportunity to ask these important questions.
Okay.
Senator Eckhart, for what purpose does the senator from Travis County rise?
To ask questions of Senator Alvarado.
Senator Alvarado, if you will yield.
I yield for questions as long as it does not remove me from the floor.
It will not. You have the floor, Senator Eckhart.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Senator Alvarado, truly for giving us this opportunity to, as Senator Hughes exhorted us, to go through the bill line by line and read the actual words of the bill. With that said, I'd like to take a moment to read the fiscal note, to ask you a question with regard to the local impact. Do you believe that this local government impact fiscal note really covers all that the locals are going to have to take on?
No, I found it to be very questionable.
It reads, according to the Texas Association of Counties, the bill would have a significant fiscal impact on counties. According to the Fort Bend County Election Administrator, the estimated fiscal impact of the bill would be between $200,000 and $12 million. The county states that the most significant component of this cost would be the replacement of voting systems to comply with the requirements of the bill at an estimated $9 million to $12 million. And that's not the only county that responded. There were 2 other counties that responded, 2 out of the 254. According to the Bexar County Election Administrator, the bill would result in an estimated fiscal impact of $350,000 to $13 million. The most significant component of this estimate would be due to the required replacement of voting systems. The county states that the provision of the bill related to video surveillance, live streaming, records retention would have significant costs that would vary by the number of elections held over the course of a year. According to the county, there would also be additional costs for reprinting new forms and envelopes, outreach for new mail ballot requirements, and providing processing for rejected voter applications. And then Cameron County Election Administrator, the bill would have an estimated annual fiscal impact of at least $250,000 and an additional cost of over $5 million for new equipment, the acquisition of surveillance equipment, and streaming and data storage. Do you believe that this is the tip of the iceberg for what this bill is going to require of the locals?
I think it's the very tip of the the fiscal note does not capture the local costs. And I know you being a former local county official, I'm sure you're well aware the impact that it's going to have on our counties.
I very much appreciate that, and I believe we were right up to the point where this bill begins to discuss those electronic voting machine requirements. I believe we left off at section 3.07. An in-person delivery, I'm looking at line 46. An in-person delivery of a marked ballot voted under this chapter must be received by an election official at the time of delivery. The receiving official shall record the voter's name, signature, and type. No, actually, is that where we left off?
I'm on that page. I don't remember the exact line. Yes, I believe, because the last thing I think we talked about was the relief and the state inspector appointed under Chapter 34, which I hope someone is getting, so we know that answer.
So yes, this is, in section 3.07, this is regarding the return of a marked ballot voted under the chapter must be returned to the early voting clerk in the official carrier envelope, and the carrier envelope may be delivered in another envelope and must be transported and delivered only by mail, common or contract carrier, or subject to subsection A1 and A2, in-person delivery by the voter who voted the ballot. And then it goes on, and this is where the new language comes in, an in-person delivery of a marked ballot voted under this chapter must be received by an election official at the time of the delivery. The receiving official shall record the voter's name, signature, and type of identification provided under subsection 63.0101 on a roster prescribed by the Secretary of the State. The receiving official shall attest on the roster that the delivery complies with this section. Now, this is a curious section because it, of course, allows for the marked ballot to be delivered by U.S. mail or by a common or contract carrier like UPS. but you can't drop it in a metal box at the county clerk's office. Is that true?
That's correct.
What do you suppose is the difference between dropping it in a metal box marked U.S. Postal Service, dropping it in a metal box marked FedEx, or dropping it in a metal box marked county clerk outside their office building or even inside their office building, which is now prohibited by this law?
Well, I'm not sure what that would be. I'm sorry, I was distracted by some folks in the gallery, Dean Whitmire, Senators West and Hinojosa. But I'm not sure what
Senator Taylor.
what the point is.
Senator Eckhart, excuse me, Senator Taylor, for what purpose do you rise?
I'm sorry, I was just going to recognize some distinguished guests we have in the audience up here in the gallery. They look very familiar, even without my glasses. State championships in 1965, would that be right?
Senator Eckhart, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I'm not sure, again, the need for this, but then that's been kind of what we've been talking about here as we've been debating or talking about this bill, and that's the benefit of going line by line, page by page, because as we're doing that, there have been some things revealed here just in this couple hours that we've been here, and a lot of it has to do with fiscal impact.
And you can imagine, of course, that as the current law stands, it would take one elections employee to open up the county clerk's box and manage those ballots. But now it's going to require shifts of multiple county clerks to man that booth and take those ballots as they come in real time.
There we go. Shift workers. I think Senator Gutierrez, he brought up the shift workers.
And that will be an expense on the county if they don't have the numbers of employees to absorb that during elections. So let's take the next new section, which starts on page 8, line 55, Communications with Voting Systems Vendor Public Information, except as provided by Section 552.110 and 552.1101 Government Code. A written letter, email, or other communication, including a communication made confidential by other law between a public official and a voting system vendor, is not confidential, is public information for purposes of Chapter 552 Government Code, and is not subject to an exception to disclosure provided by Chapter 552 Government Code. You worked in local government as well as state government, correct?
City government, that's right. Mm-hmm.
In your experience, is local government more transparent or less transparent than state government?
Oh, I think it's very transparent because people know more often than not who their city council member is, more than they do their state representative or state legislator.
And this section, I believe, and I'd like your opinion, seems to be yet another example where the state will impose greater requirements of transparency on the local government than they would be willing to impose on themselves.
That's correct, and this seems to be a pattern here, a driving theme throughout the bill, and as we said earlier, that the fiscal note doesn't capture what the fiscal impact is to local government entities. And again, you being a former county local official, you know very well how much of a fiscal burden that can be.
In fact, I think that this particular provision is frankly redundant because a county or a municipality that's engaged with a vendor All of their information is subject to public information after the negotiation is complete. So this seems even redundant and, again, perpetuates this perception in this bill that there are shenanigans going on at every level. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree with that. That's a nice way of summing it up.
I'll move to section 309 and the new section starting at line 67. Electronic devices in central counting station. A counting station manager and the presiding judge of the counting station shall develop a protocol under which any electronic device inside a central counting station that is necessary to count votes is equipped with software that tracks all input and activity on the electronic device. Does that seem rather obvious to you?
I would agree. Again, we are combing through this and focusing and highlighting new things that may have been overlooked in this bill.
I think that this is another one of those, though, that is rather redundant. Of course, if you're going to have a device, you want it to count votes. Again, I think this lends itself to this verbiage that will allow people to think wrongly that there are shenanigans going on at every level. Now, the next provision, though, the B on page 9, starting at line 4, the counting station manager and the presiding judge of the counting station shall ensure that the input and activity tracked by the software is printed and delivered to the Secretary of State not later than the 5th day after vote counting is complete. I don't see any problem with that. I don't think that that's controversial at all.
Right.
Which makes me wonder why we even need to codify it.
I'm not sure your guess is as good as mine.
We go to line 8, C. This section applies only to a central counting station located in a county with a population of 250,000 or more. What's the point of that population bracket? Are these protocols that are ostensibly necessary to prevent fraud not necessary in counties under 250,000?
Again, your guess is as good as mine, Senator Eckhart.
It seems rather odd, since these provisions are obvious. If you're a county election administrator, you want an accurate count. So I don't think you'll find a single county election administrator anywhere in the land who's going to be against these provisions. They're just going to wonder why they're unequally applied and why you have to codify it at all.
I would agree.
Let's go down to line 19 on page 9. After January 1, 2024, an authority operating a central counting station under this chapter may not purchase or use a centrally counted optical ballot scan system that uses a data storage disk on which information, once written, is capable of being modified. It's my understanding from discussing this with elections administrators that this provision is problematic for a number of reasons. Have you heard that it's problematic because of the tremendous fiscal note that it carries for some of our smaller rural counties?
Yes, I have. And if I had those small rural counties in my district, I would be very leery to support such legislation.
Have you also heard, as I have heard from our larger counties, our major metro counties, that will easily meet this date? They're concerns that this language is prescriptive and in conflict with federal law with regard to voting machines.
I saw that somewhere in a stack of material that I was looking at last night. Yes.
I'll see if I can find that from the Texas Association of Elections Administrators, who are very concerned about some of the more prescriptive language in this bill, presuming IT technologies that are outdated, that are no longer utilized, and may cause them problems. Let's go to section 3.11. This new language starting on line 26. The presiding judge of the central counting station shall provide and attest to a written reconciliation of votes and voters at the close of the tabulation for election day, and again after the central counting station meets for the last time to process late arriving ballots by mail and provisional ballots. The Secretary of State shall create and promulgate rules and a form to facilitate compliance with this subsection. The form shall be posted on a website maintained by the county along with election returns and results. Do you see any issue with that? Because I don't.
Yeah,
and this is common practice.
I don't believe so.
It's curious to me that we're codifying common practice as though there was some problem that needed to be fixed.
Yeah, and as I said earlier in talking with Dean Whitmire, this language here about the presiding judge, I've been an election judge before, so I'm quite familiar with that part of it.
It strikes me as I read through this bill, as I've read through it multiple times in its multiple iterations, that the current law sets a floor below which no county can dip. But this new law is so prescriptive that it provides no wiggle room. It sets both a floor and a ceiling, and there is no innovation that is available to the local elections administrators. Is that your impression?
I think you've described it pretty well, yes.
Line 37, if the test is being conducted for an election in which a county election board, this is another one that's just a no-brainer that happens all the time, which makes me wonder why it's even in here. If the test is being conducted for an election in which a county election board has been established under section 51.002, the general custodian of election records shall notify each member of the board of the test at least 48 hours before the date of the test. If the county election board chooses to witness the test, each member shall sign the statement required by subsection E1. And then it goes on, a test conducted under this section must also require the general custodian of election records to demonstrate, using a representative sample of voting systems equipment, that the source code of the equipment has not been altered. I have been in these demonstrations. When Travis County purchased our new voting system, the county clerk, who is the elections administrator in Travis County, reached out to all of the relevant parties, all of the elected officials, as well as her election board, invited them well in advance to multiple opportunities to demonstrate the operation of the voting machine, as well as inviting a group of college students at University of Texas in the computer sciences to come and try and hack it. So again, this seems redundant to what's already occurring and makes me wonder, why do we need to codify this? Elections administrators are generally pretty proud of what they do and are more than happy to demonstrate it.
I would agree with you.
Let's go to Article 4, voting by mail, because this part's really fun. Line 50, an application must be submitted in writing and signed by the applicant using ink on paper. An electronic signature or photocopied signature is not permitted. Why do you suppose that's the case, since banks don't even require ink on paper signature anymore?
I'm not sure, and I saw that somewhere in another document that I was reading before we started. I think is it called a wet signature or something? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
We commonly use DocuSign and various other applications to, title companies use DocuSign and other applications. People sit around in their boxer shorts at 3 o'clock in the morning and move large sums of money around in stock trades without a wet signature. But for some reason, this bill assumes a wet signature is going to somehow prevent fraud.
That's correct. I'm glad you raised the issue. Like I said, I saw that in some other data that I was reading that, I forget which group it was that had some concerns about that, the wet signature.
Let's go to line 55. Solicitation of ballot by mail applications prohibited. This one's super curious. The early voting clerk may not attempt to solicit a person to complete an application for an early voting ballot by mail, whether directly or through a third party. That sounds so innocuous, but you and I know what's going on here. Candidates can still solicit a person to complete an application for an early voting ballot by mail, whether direct or through a third party, right?
Yes, and that's what is so bizarre, is that a nonpartisan official office can't do it, but yet a partisan or candidate-specific campaign can do that.
I find that so curious. Why do you suppose that is, that the author doesn't want the professional elections administrator who is already aware and has a database at his or her fingertips of eligible voters in the county who are above the age of 65? Why not send them an unsolicited invitation to vote by mail?
And are you talking about 65 and older?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I'm not sure, but I have a hunch that this has a lot to do with what took place in Harris County. And our election, we now have an election administrator, kind of a new concept in Harris County, not elected to office, but appointed by Harris County Commissioner's Court, Ms. Isabel Longoria. And there was a lot of exchange in the hearing a couple of days ago about that. Harris County was engaged in that. But I think many of our 65 and older are accustomed to getting the application from their county government. It seems like that is a fair way to do it. It's nonpartisan. It's not a particular campaign office or candidate.
I'll tell you, in my experience as a county judge, the county clerk never, under the current law, this would not be prohibited. But I'll tell you, at least in Travis County, the county clerk did not send out those invitations to vote by mail. And the reason was because the candidates liked doing it so much, they didn't want the county clerk to infringe upon it. It was a big campaign strategy that they didn't want the county clerk horning in on. Which indicates to me that maybe this bill should flip it and say only the elections administrator can send out vote by mail applications.
That's a thought, and I'm sure, all of us have been engaged in that. Your campaign sends it out, and but you would think that it would be the other way around.
The very curious provision. Line 65, the following information, let's see. An early voting ballot application must include the following information: the number of the applicant's driver's license, election identification certificate, or personal identification card issued by the Department of Public Safety, if the applicant has not been issued a number described by paragraph A, the last 4 digits of the applicant's social security number, or a statement by the applicant that the applicant has not been issued a number described by paragraph A or B. This provision was pretty heavily debated in the various iterations of the bill. In its original form, it has been added to so that at least there's this C, a statement by the applicant that the applicant has not been issued a number described by paragraph A or B. What do you think that, that there has been articulated concern about vote by mail? How does this assist in getting people, facilitating
Senator
people's
Eckhart?
vote? Yes, sir.
You have been recognized to ask questions of Senator Alvarado, and so if you would couch your statements as inquiries.
As I was saying, how do you think this provision assists in with individuals who are voting by mail?
Well, I mean, I think that some of these things, of course, where this bill started was, required a lot more. But you may have a senior who lives alone, doesn't drive anymore, may get around with, in Houston it's called Metro Lift. May not be able to find that documentation and may just say, you know what, the heck with it. This is getting too complicated. I'm not going to sign up for a ballot.
I'll tell you, that was exactly the experience that my mother had. Even under the current law, after she no longer had a driver's license and she'd moved to another state and returned, she was unable to pull together the necessary identification and proof of residence because she lived with my brother and had none of the bills in her name. Ultimately, she could have persevered, but she just got tired of dealing with it, so she stopped and was no longer eligible to vote. Go to the next section.
Senator Eckhart, I was just reminded and just thinking about some upcoming elections. We have our Houston Independent School District elections. There's no mayoral race. And, in a lot of these school board races, candidates, they're not raising a lot of money. They may not be able to send out, HISD, our school district, may not be sending out. The candidates may not do it.
Yeah, they just might not.
Because, they're not, it's not like a legislative race where you're able to raise more money. So you take a situation like in Harris County, that's going to be problematic.
It sure could if we are now reliant on campaigns to send out those applications for vote by mail to eligible voters, because the county clerk shall not.
And you have to wonder why this issue wasn't raised before.
It is curious. And also, it may come into play that candidates, what do you think? What do you think about the chilling effect of the vote harvesting provision on candidates sending out vote by mail applications?
I'm concerned about that. There's been a lot of talk and focus. I know Senator Gutierrez has talked about it a lot on the vote harvesting. And, again, all of these things are coming from places where we're not quite sure of the justification for them, but what we're doing tonight is certainly continuing to shine the light on some of the many unanswered questions with this bill.
I flipped over to page 11, section 84.011, that starts at line 16, and that clearly indicates that this is not a mistake. The author very much intends what we've been discussing here. And I want to get your take on what the intention is here. Distribution of application form. Except as provided by subsection C or is otherwise authorized by this code, an officer or employee of this state or of a political subdivision of this state may not distribute an application form for an early voting ballot to a person who did not request an application under section 84.001. An officer or employee of this state or of a political subdivision of this state may not use public funds to facilitate the distribution by another person of an application form for an early voting ballot to a person who did not request an application under section 84.001. But here's the kicker, it's in C. A political party or a candidate for office may distribute an application form for an early voting ballot to a person who did not request an application under section 84.001. This is striking to me because as a county judge, a request was made during COVID that the Travis County Commissioners Court allocate funds to send out vote-by-mail applications to every individual in Travis County who was over 65 and registered to vote. This provision would specifically prohibit that, but not for candidates. Why is that?
Yeah, I don't understand it either. Again, it seems like it would be the other way around.
Yeah. Moving down this page. Looking at line 53, an election judge may permit a person to whom an early voting ballot has been sent who cancels the person's application for a ballot to be voted by mail in accordance with section 84.032, but fails to return the ballot to be voted by mail to the early voting clerk, deputy early voting clerk, or presiding judge as provided by the section to vote only a provisional ballot under 63.011. In my experience as county judge, and this is no slagging our older voters, but when you do the canvassing, there is always a certain number of people who voted twice. I'm just going to be honest with you all. There's always a certain number of people who voted twice in the canvass. And those instances are reported to the county attorney's office for investigation, and invariably it comes back that it was an elderly individual who voted by mail, forgot that they had voted by mail, and then showed up in person and voted. So I'm looking at this provision, and it says if they haven't surrendered their ballot by mail, who cancels the person's application for ballot by mail in accordance with the section, but fails to return the ballot, fails to surrender the ballot, they can only vote provisionally. That makes sense, but wouldn't you agree that if the county clerk's going to pick it up in the canvas whether they voted provisionally or not, won't they?
I would say yes.
So whether the county clerk voted the person or voted the person provisionally, they're still going to find out if the person also accidentally, or maybe even intentionally, sent in a vote-by-mail application, a vote-by-mail ballot as well. Does this prevent any fraud?
No.
The next section, line 62, if the information required under section 84.002A1A included on the application does not identify the same voter identification on the applicant's application for voter registration under section 13.002C8, the clerk shall reject the application. Is there any opportunity for cure in this bill? For a clerk rejecting the ballot because the identification wasn't the same identification on the application?
I don't know about that particular section. I know cure was talked about in, I think it was maybe Senator Zaffarini that had an amendment to that effect.
Well, let's keep going and see if we find a cure for it. It says the carrier envelope must include a space that is hidden from view. That was added later, and thank goodness, because if it wasn't hidden from view, that would be all kinds of trouble. Must be hidden from view when the envelope is sealed from the voter for the voter to enter the following information. 1, the number of the voter's driver's license, election identification certification, or personal identification card issued by the Department of Public Safety. 2, the voter has not been issued a number described by section 1, if the voter has not been issued, the last 4 digits of the voter's social security number, or 3, a statement by the applicant that the applicant has not been issued a number described by subsection 1 or 2. H, a person may use the number of a driver's license, election identification certification, or personal identification card that has expired for the purposes of subsection G if the license or identification is otherwise valid. No record associating an individual voter with a ballot may be created. So I've got a couple of questions about that. First off, the person may have made their application and said at the time of their application, provided a statement that the applicant has not been issued a number described by subsection 1 or 2. But by the time they actually vote their ballot, they do have one of these things, and so they put that down on their envelope. Under that circumstance, doesn't this bill say that the clerk shall reject their ballot?
Yes.
This bill also says in F, line 15, no record associating an individual voter with a ballot may be created. But in fact, this is a record associating an individual voter with a ballot because the ballot is inside the envelope, and the envelope identifies the individual, does it not?
Yes, I see that.
That's a little curious. I don't yet see a cure for a clerk rejecting a ballot based on a discrepancy in the identification number on the application versus the ballot. I know that later on in the bill there's a cure when the signature committee rejects a ballot because a signature doesn't appear to be a match.
Right.
But I don't think there's a cure for this. Going down to line 45, section 87.0271, opportunity to correct defect. Oh, here we go, maybe so. Signature verification committee. It's just what we were talking about. This section applies to an early voting ballot voted by mail for which the voter did not sign the carrier envelope certificate, for which it cannot immediately be determined whether the signature on the carrier envelope certificate is that of the voter, missing any required statement of residence, or containing incomplete information with respect to a witness. So none of those, do any of those apply to a discrepancy in their identification?
I don't see that.
I don't either. Line 56, before deciding whether to accept or reject a timely delivered ballot under section 87.027, the signature verification committee may, it's discretionary, may, 1, return the carrier envelope to the voter by mail If the Signature Verification Committee determines that it would be possible to correct the defect and return the carrier envelope before the time the polls are required to close on Election Day, or notify the voter of the defect by telephone or email and inform the voter that the voter may come to the early voting clerk's office in person to A, correct the defect, or B, request to have the voter's application to vote by mail canceled under Section 84.032. If the Signature Verification Committee takes an action described by subsection B, which is to say they use their discretion to provide a cure, the committee must take either action described by that subsection with respect to each ballot in the election to which this section applies. So at least they have to treat everyone equally. D, a poll watcher is entitled to observe an action taken under subsection B, and E, the Secretary of the State may prescribe any procedures necessary to implement this section. Why do you suppose the author left this discretionary rather than requiring it?
I don't know. And then there again, poll watcher pops up into this.
So
another entitled provision for the poll watcher. So just, I've just got a real beef with this, all the provisions containing the poll watcher. But
there does seem to be a lot of surveillance in this bill, isn't there?
Yes.
I also don't see that this cure provision goes to the identification information up in section 4.09. So it looks like there may be no cure for the 4.09 carrier envelope identification discrepancy issue.
And again, Senator Eckhart, that's one of the, I think, values of going through this line by line, because, sometimes during floor debate, we're not quite looking at every single word, but we've been here 4 hours, I guess, and I don't know how much longer we'll be here, but we're going to make the most of this time and point out the discrepancies that we see line by line, word by word.
Well, let's move on down to section 4.13, and I'm hopeful that perhaps this portion will pick up some of our concerns. On line 34, this section 4.13, goes to a ballot may be accepted only if.
I'm sorry, what line are you on?
The section 4.13 starts at line 8. But I skipped down to where it says a ballot may be accepted only if, line 11. And it has only if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all of which is in current law. And then you go to 8, which is on line 34. Only if the information required under section 86.002G provided by the voter identifies the same voter identified on the voter's application for voter registration under section 13.002C8. That goes back to what we were talking about before, the voter identification matching. Line 38, if a voter provides the information required under section 86.002G and it identifies the same voter identified on the voter's application for voter registration under section 13.002C8, the signature on the ballot application and on the carrier envelope certificate shall be rebuttably presumed to be the signature of the voter. So 8, line 34, the information required under section 86.002G provided by the voter identifies the same voter identified on the voter's application for the voter registration under section 13.002. So basically what we're saying in this is that the information has to match between voter registration and the vote by mail application. And it does create a rebuttable presumption that the signature on the ballot application and on the carrier envelope certificate shall be rebuttably presumed to be the signature of the voter. So that's a...
Sorry?
Do you think that that seems to have been an improvement over what was in the original bill?
Yes.
And we can be thankful to Senator Hughes for that. This is a curious part that I struggle with some. This is line 44. In making the determination under section B2 to determine whether the signatures are those of the voter, the board may also compare the signatures with any known signature of the voter on file with the county clerk or voter registrar. The law as it currently stands, they can go back and only look at 2 or more signatures made within the preceding 6 years. What do you think will happen being able to go back and look at any known signature at any time during that person's life?
Yeah, I'm not sure, and that's, I know there was a significant amount of testimony about that part. So again, many questions about this bill, solutions in search of problems. It's puzzling.
It's a puzzler because I've been keeping journals since I was about 12, and boy, my handwriting looks really different. But I suppose they could use my signature in my journal from when I was 12.
I'd like to see what your journal entries were at the age of 12.
They were really boring. There is an opportunity to correct this defect, though, and that comes in the next line, 52. Early voting ballot board. This section applies to an early voting ballot voted by mail, for which the voter did not sign the carrier envelope certificate, for which it cannot immediately be determined whether the signature on the carrier envelope certificate is that of the voter, missing required statements of residence, or containing incomplete information with respect to a witness. But before deciding whether to accept or reject a timely delivered ballot under section 87.041, the early voting ballot board may, again, this is a may cure that looks very similar to the previous may cure. Again, why not make this a shall instead of a may, and why include a poll watcher in your determinations?
You raise a very good question, especially about the poll watcher. Not sure what that has to do with anything, but.
The next section, 4.15, that starts on line 15 of page 14, election code is amended to read as follows. And it has some stuff that's in current law, but then it goes down to say, and I'm going to skip from line 17 down to line 30 to the new part. The early voting clerk shall, not later than the 30th day after election day, deliver notice to the Attorney General, including certified copies of the carrier envelope and corresponding ballot application of any ballot rejected because, and there are a number of things that are in current law, or 6, the early voting ballot board or the signature verification committee determined that another violation of the election code occurred. This is intriguing to me that this is specific to a violation of the election code. Are you aware that the Attorney General has no independent authority to prosecute criminal election code violations?
I am not advised.
It does not. The Attorney General does not have original jurisdiction. That is set out in the Texas Constitution, and it is further corroborated in the elections code, the government code, and in case law. Next, we'll go to line 41 on page 14. Ballots voted by mail shall be tabulated and stored separately from the ballots voted by personal appearance and shall be separately reported on the returns. This is highly prescriptive, probably a perfectly decent idea, but do you think that this is required to be so specifically laid out in statute?
Yeah, I read that last night, and I wasn't really sure what why it was needed. I mean, I know, early ballots are released. It's counted before, I guess, the polls close, because we always get the results right at pretty much shortly after 7 o'clock after the polls close. So. I'm not sure about that.
Again, do you find it curious? Do you find it curious that the party that is the proponent of this legislation is also the party that purports to be for small government?
Well, we talked about that with Senator Gutierrez. I mean, going by this line by line by line, unfunded mandates involving more state agencies, not even having an idea of how many FTEs are going to have to be hired to carry out some of these things in this bill. The printing of the manuals for the poll watchers. It's throughout the bill. This bill is not only suppressive, but it is certainly having a negative fiscal impact on our state and certainly on our county local governments.
The next section is very similar. It's the lines 49 through 52, and it basically goes to the same thing. Counting ballots and preparing returns. The early voting electronic system ballots counted at a central counting station. The ballots cast at a precinct polling places, and ballots voted by mail shall be tabulated separately and shall be separately reported on the returns. Again, I can see that this is good practice, and it is certainly helpful if there is an investigation. But do you see any cause to require it up front? I mean...
No, I don't.
And it's not like you couldn't determine where the ballots came from if you don't store them separately.
Correct.
Now, it could be you'd have a really, really sloppy election administrator somewhere. I did have a story come to me from one of our more rural counties that they had an elections administrator who probably should have retired. And she did get sloppy, and it was a problem. And the commissioner's court had to gently suggest that she retire sooner than later so that they could fix that. But they did an investigation to determine whether any election results had been affected by her diminishing capacity and found that it hadn't. But they nevertheless fired her before it could get to that point. And that seems appropriate, doesn't it? Let's go to section 4.18. Line 60, electronic records made under this section shall record both sides of any application, envelope, or ballot recorded, and all such records shall be provided to the early voting ballot board, the signature verification committee, or both. Is there any issue with that?
No.
I don't see any issue with it either, except that it's probably redundant to what the practices already are. Line 66, notes. This one's curious. Each member of an early voting ballot board and each member of a signature verification committee is entitled to take and keep any notes reasonably necessary to perform the member's duties under this chapter. Elections administrators, are you aware of the elections administrators, Texas Association of Election Administrators letter, where they detail how this section is concerning to them?
Is this what I have here?
I believe so.
Okay. No, but why? I mean, I think you probably a little more familiar than I am. If you want to read it and ask me a question about it, I'm happy to attempt to answer.
I'll see if I can find it, but they are concerned, or actually this may have come from a specific county clerk, that for a volunteer member of the early voting ballot board or the signature verification committee to be able to take notes on the eligibility of a person's ballot with the verification information.
Can I ask what section of that?
This is section 4.18 on page 14, running from lines
okay, you're back on the
58
bill. Okay.
down to 69. I'm sorry, 4.19.
Okay, what line?
4.19, running from lines 64 to 69.
Okay, I thought we were looking at the document from the election administrators. Okay, go ahead.
And there are concerns that a volunteer on one of these boards can take notes about a person's name, the eligibility to vote, their identification numbers, and they get to keep those notes. Does that seem concerning?
I think that's a bit of an overreach. I mean, I don't know why they would want to hold on to that. I don't know, what value that is.
Would you, if you were the voter whose ballot was being considered for rejection, would it cause you concern that a volunteer on the signature verification committee could keep their notes about whether or not your ballot was valid?
Absolutely.
And why?
Sure.
Let's go to page 15, and this is assistance of voters. Line 5, the regular voting procedures, except those in subchapter B, may be modified by the election officer to the extent necessary to conduct voting under this section. That doesn't seem to be an issue. So let's go to the next line. Line 8, except as provided by subsection or section 33.057, a poll watcher is entitled to observe any activity conducted under this section. What do you think?
It seems like every other page we turn to, there's something about the poll watcher. And Dean Whitmire and I were talking about that earlier, but here we are again.
Why do you suppose the author of the bill felt it necessary to insert a poll watcher in at this point to observe any activity?
Yeah. Let's make sure people that are either here in the gallery, here on the floor, streaming, watching, wherever, except as provided by section 33.57, a poll watcher is entitled to observe any activity conducted under this section. Again, entitling the poll watcher, empowering the poll watcher, it's pretty consistent through this bill.
Do you recall anything in this bill that holds a poll watcher accountable? Any fine, civil penalty, civil suit, criminal liability, anywhere in this bill for a poll watcher?
No, not to my knowledge. And again, that's a big part of the problem when it comes to the provisions about the poll watchers. I mean, we've expanded their role. That's why I said we probably need to call it something else other than poll watcher.
Isn't it curious? I mean, do you find it remarkable that there are $1,000 fines, Class A misdemeanor prosecution that could include a year in jail, $4,000 fine, civil liability, loss of job and benefits for elections workers, but there doesn't seem to be any fines, fees, civil or criminal accountability for poll watchers?
I'm very aware of that and very glad that you pointed that out. Sometimes some of those small details get lost in the debate, but I hope for the public that's here in the gallery, thank you very much for caring about this bill and the election process. But this issue of empowering poll watchers is problematic, and it's making it more difficult to punish poll watchers who are engaged in misconduct or who overstep their boundaries, but yet for our poll workers, there are all sorts of penalties for them.
You know, Senator Miles, your colleague from Harris County, he had mentioned a group, and I don't recall the name of the group, that is an armed group that goes to poll locations. We'll have to get with Senator Miles on that. Let's go to the next section of this, because this is also very curious here on line 10. A person who simultaneously assists 3 or more voters voting under this section by providing the voters with transportation to the polling place must complete and sign a form provided by an elections officer that contains the person's name and address and whether the person is providing assistance solely under this section or under both this section and subchapter B. Is this just a backdoor way of getting to souls to the polls?
Well, yes, it absolutely could be, and I don't remember the person's name that testimony that I read several hours ago raised this issue about the form.
So if somebody, Good Samaritan, is taking people to the polls, they need to put their name, address, and what they're, under what provision of law they are providing this Good Samaritan service.
And I can think of a situation where you may have in a neighborhood, people that go vote together that maybe they're all carpooling or something, but they may need, especially if they're senior citizens, and this happens a lot in our neighborhoods. It's an event, it's an outing, and you may have some of them that need that assistance. And requiring the name and address of this person who's just simply assisting. Now, and then all these other things. It's more paperwork. It's creating another loophole that people have to jump through.
It does seem like there's a lot of gotchas in this bill, aren't there?
I would say so.
Have you run across anything in this bill that actually helps someone vote?
Well, I was looking for something along the lines of what a bill I've been proposing for the last 5 sessions, which is straight up online voter registration. It doesn't have anything to do with renewing your driver's license, but just allowing anybody who's eligible to go and register online. Do you know that it is a lot cheaper to do it that way than the way we do it now? So,
I found a couple that you might think, you might arguably say help people vote, but I'd like your opinion on them because I ended up feeling like maybe not so much. One was the requirement that smaller counties leave their polls open 8 hours instead of 6. But then I realized under current law, they could have their polls open for 8 hours instead of 6. So do you think that helps people vote?
oh, yeah,
But they could already do it.
yeah.
The other thing I found that helps people vote is that this bill allows for a change of address electronically on the state's website, which is helpful. But those are the only two things I could find. Could you find any others?
Not at this time.
Let's see if we find any others. Again, to this, assisting people by driving them to the polls. The next section, which starts on line 16 of page 15. Subsection F, I love this, does not apply if the person is related to each voter within the second degree by affinity or the third degree by consanguinity, as determined under subsection B, Chapter 573 Government Code. Can you imagine Cousin Jim gets in his minivan and goes and gets his sister, his brother-in-law's best buddy, who used to be married to his ex-sister-in-law, and a couple of their friends. And he gets to the polling place and they're saying, how many of these people are related to you within the second degree by affinity or the third degree by consanguinity? What do you think he's going to do?
Well, Jim is probably going to wonder why he volunteered to pick up everybody. He's got a very crowded van now, it sounds like. But he's probably rethinking why he offered to pick up all these people to vote.
And why does it matter if Jim is related within the third degree of consanguinity, whatever that means?
I don't know.
Line 20, a form completed under subsection F shall be delivered to the Secretary of State as soon as practicable. The Secretary shall retain a form delivered under this section for the period for preserving the precinct election records, and shall make the form available to the Attorney General for inspection upon request. How many lists does this bill, how many lists of people who are trying to vote or people who are trying to help people vote does this bill require be sent to the Attorney General?
Well, there are quite a bit. And as we said earlier, and Senator Gutierrez pointed this out, that we are involving many more state agencies now in the election process, more than before. And it just, again, inviting more government, having probably, I'm pretty sure, a larger fiscal impact. And as we were talking about earlier, that the fiscal note certainly doesn't even include what it's going to have, the impact that it'll have on our county government officials, registrar offices.
I was keeping a list of the lists. And so far I've counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but this is one I didn't count. Have you counted up the numbers of lists of people trying to vote and lists of people trying to help people vote?
No, I mean, since we've been here now several hours, I mean, I knew there's been about a handful that we have made reference to.
Let's go down to section 5.02, which starts on line 27 and deals with the eligibility for assistance. This section's also curious to me. Eligibility for assistance. A voter is eligible to receive assistance in marking or reading the ballot as provided by the subchapter if the voter cannot prepare or read the ballot because of. Would you agree that the addition of reading is actually that's a good addition, marking or reading the ballot? But then when you get down to line 39, submission of form by assistant. A person other than an election officer who assists a voter in accordance with this chapter is required to complete a form stating 1, the name and address of the person assisting the voter, 2, the relationship to the voter of the person assisting the voter, and 3, whether the person assisting the voter received or accepted any form of compensation or other benefit from a candidate, campaign, or political committee. B, the Secretary of State shall prescribe the form required by this section. That's not bad. The form must be incorporated into the official carrier envelope if the voter is voting an early voting ballot by mail and receives assistance under section 86.010, or must be submitted to an election officer at the time the voter casts a ballot if the voter is voting at a polling place or under section 64.009. Would you agree that someone assisting a voter should state their name and their relationship to the voter and that they're not getting paid?
I mean, that's not typically asked. I don't know. I probably have mixed feelings on that one.
It starts to get problematic later on with the oath down, starting at line 59.
Yes, and I mentioned that earlier in yet another testimony about, I don't recall the witness's name, but I was glad that this witness submitted testimony raising the issue of the oath.
So, yeah, in
fact, now I think it was the line that she used, under penalty of perjury.
And that's, I think, where it gets problematic. This upper section, the section, between lines 43 and 56, that does it concern you so much that someone who's helping a voter actually has to say, here's my name, and I am not getting paid, and I have been told by the voter that they need this assistance? That's not so problematic, but then it goes on to say, I swear or affirm under perjury, penalty of perjury, that the voter I am assisting represented to me they are eligible to receive assistance. I will not, and this part is in existing law, I will not suggest by word, sign, or gesture how the voter should vote, to stating propositions on the ballot, and to naming candidates, and if listed, their political parties. That's struck. That helper can no longer do that under this bill.
I see that.
And do you find that problematic, that they can no longer acknowledge the voters, answering the voters' questions to confines answering the voters' questions to stating the proposition on the ballot, and naming candidates, and if listed, their political parties? The bill goes on to say, and this part's in existing law, I will prepare the voter's ballot as the voter directs. That's good. And then it adds, I did not encourage, pressure, or coerce the voter into choosing me to provide assistance. Again, we've got that Good Samaritan Jim, and he knows his mother-in-law might not go to the polls, might not fill out her ballot unless she's encouraged. Is he going to read that and go, well, dang, I guess I shouldn't encourage her.
Well, and it could be misinterpreted. Say, the mother-in-law says, so what was the name of that candidate we talked about, or that candidate that had a door knocker come over, and Jim provides the information. Could that be seen as something that may violate this?
I would say so, since that portion of the bill, that portion of the existing law was struck. And this other portion was added. Jim can't encourage his mother-in-law to choose him to provide assistance. So Jim can say, Betty, you really ought to vote. And by the way, I've got that minivan, which makes it really easy for you to get into. So I can help you out. I can drive you to the polls. I can read off the candidates to you and their party affiliation. Or you can just struggle through it with your vote by mail application on your own. But I'd like to help you out.
And
is this now illegal?
Yeah, and consider if it's a senior citizen. I think about my mom, and I know my sister Yolanda's somewhere up in the gallery, but I think about my mom who's 93. She may not recall, which candidate it was for which person. Again, some of this could be misconstrued. And may be considered some sort of a violation, but there was no malice there. It was just answering a question, being helpful, giving educational information about maybe a particular candidate or party.
Does this go down on our list of yet more discouragement and confusion just for people who are trying to help people vote?
Yes.
This provision goes on in section 5.05. A person who assists a voter to prepare a ballot to be voted by mail shall enter on the official carrier envelope of the voter the person's signature, printed name, and residence address. That's in current law. And then this is the new part. The relationship with the person providing the assistance to the voter, and this is another new part. Whether the person received or accepted any form of compensation or other benefit from a candidate, campaign, or political committee in exchange for providing assistance. So, you've been a candidate a lot. Everybody in this room has been a candidate a lot. Isn't it common practice to have big old GOTV efforts where you get on a phone bank and you call around to people saying, do you need a ride to the polls?
Oh, it's common practice in campaigns.
So this common practice in campaigns is made illegal by this bill. So let's go to line 22 on page 16. Subsection F does not apply to a violation of subsection C if the person is related to the voter within the second degree by affinity or the third degree by consanguinity. There's those words again. I love consanguinity. Say it 3 times fast. As determined under subchapter B, chapter 573, government code, or was physically living in the same dwelling as the voter at the time of the event. Or 2, a violation of subsection E if the person is related to the voter within the second degree of affinity or the third degree by consanguinity as determined under subsection B, chapter 573, government code. An offense under this section for a violation of subsection C is increased to the next higher category of offense if it is shown on the trial of an offense under this section that, and it goes on, indicating that the relationship of the person to the voter. Again, what do you think about, is this going to encourage people to assist people in voting? Or is it going to frighten them, confuse them, and discourage them from helping people to vote?
I think all of the above.
Is anybody in this chamber in favor of coercing people into voting in ways that they don't want to vote?
I can't imagine that. I mean, that seems so cruel.
Senator Miles just texted in, the King Street Patriots was the name of the anti-minority group that we had problems with in my first election as a senator. And yes, they were traveling with long guns. Let's go to line 52, Article 6, fraud and other unlawful practices. Finally, we get to a section that is explicitly about fraud. Maybe. Let's see. Line 55, offenses related to provisional voting. An election judge commits an offense if the judge knowingly provides a voter with a form for an affidavit required by section 63.001 if the form contained information that the judge entered on the form knowing it was false. That sounds really bad. And are you against that? Well, yeah, I mean, putting stuff on a form that you know is false, yeah. But isn't that already against the law?
Yes, it is.
I mean, come on. If an election judge knowingly provides a form that they themselves have put information on that's false, isn't that already under the penal code
It
a problem?
probably is, and I'm sure that these judges go through quite extensive training, and may even be in an oath or something that they take.
Yeah, this strikes me as interesting because there are lots of provisions in the penal code with regard to improper behavior by an elected official, as well as the falsification of governmental records. Under this law, under this bill, it's a state jail felony. I haven't gone back to look in the penal code to see what the charging levels are for the offenses that this section is frankly redundant to. But I'd be curious to know, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would.
Let's go to page 17. It starts to get interesting here. Go back and make sure I didn't miss any important things that would make us feel better about this bill. Section 6.02 at the tail end of page 16 on line 66-67. Person commits an offense if, with respect to another person over whom the person has authority in the scope of employment, the person knowingly refuses to permit the other person to be absent from work on election day, or, and this is the new part, while early voting is in progress for the purposes of attending the polls to vote. That's good. Would you agree? There's something good.
I would.
Penalty for, let's see. So maybe we could add that to our list of things that actually helps people vote. Maybe there's 3 things.
We'll keep that list going.
Yeah. Subjects or threatens to subject the other person to a penalty for attending the polls on election day or while early voting is in progress to vote. Okay, so this section, hey, we can add a 3rd thing that is arguably helping people vote in this bill. That's awesome. But then we get to the next section, 6.03 on vote harvesting, which sounds really terrible. This portion is really hard for me, so Senator Alvarado, help me piece this together. So first of all, in the definition section for vote harvesting, benefit. This is not too hard to wrap one's head around. Benefit means anything reasonably regarded as a gain or advantage, including a promise or offer of employment, a political favor, or an official act of discretion, whether to a person or another party whose welfare is of interest to the person. That seems on its face. Do you think that seems like a pretty decent definition of benefit? Pretty comprehensive?
Sure.
The next one, too, vote. It's defined, vote harvesting services is defined as meaning in-person interaction with one or more voters in the physical presence of an official ballot, a ballot voted by mail, or an application for ballot by mail, intended to deliver votes for a specific candidate or measure. This is where it gets tricky, and it's a real head scratcher. So later on, it says vote harvesting is a crime. It's intriguing to me that if you're doing this in person, if you're in person interacting and in the physical presence of a ballot, and you're intending to get this person to vote for Bob, that's illegal. But if you're talking to them on the phone, and they're standing in the same room with their vote by mail ballot, and you're trying to get them to vote for Bob, that's not illegal. Why?
I'm not sure, but I do want to go back to an issue we were talking about earlier.
Sure.
So according to the Texas Penal Code, someone found guilty of a state jail felony can be sentenced to up to 2 years in jail and pay fines up to $10,000. The lowest sentence that someone found guilty of a state jail felony can serve is 180 days in jail. State jail felonies in Texas include criminally negligent homicide, forging a check, interfering with child custody, burglarizing a building, credit card fraud, animal cruelty, improper visual recording or photography, false report or false alarm, identity theft, evading arrest with a vehicle, theft of items of value between $1,500 and $20,000, and DWI with a child passenger.
Yeah,
So,
this is the really, really bad person, according to this bill, that deserves to be put in jail. And we've got some more criminal penalties coming up for a person who's just trying to help people vote.
yeah, I think you left off at the harvesting.
This is such an important exercise to go through and make a list of the lists and a list of the criminal penalties, and to really put some meat on the bones as to the criminalizing provisions in this bill. So back to vote harvesting for a moment. A person commits an offense if the person directly or through a third party knowingly provides or offers to provide vote harvesting services in exchange for compensation or other benefit. Again, on its face, it sounds kind of reasonable, but then let's break it down. A person commits an offense if the person, directly or through a third party, knowingly provides or offers to provide in-person interaction with one or more votes in the physical presence of an official ballot, a ballot voted by mail, or an application for ballot by mail intended to deliver votes for a specific candidate or measure. I jumped back because it says, provides or knowingly offers to provide vote harvesting. If you just plug in the definition of vote harvesting there, it just sounds like campaigning.
Yeah.
In exchange for compensation or other benefit. Does it sound to you like this bill is just making paid campaign workers illegal?
Well, it certainly is perceived to be that way. And many of us in campaigns, we have people that we hire to do an assortment of activities in a campaign.
I'm just still stuck on the definition of vote harvesting. In-person interaction with one or more voters in the physical presence of an official ballot, a ballot voted by mail, or an application for ballot by mail, intended to deliver votes for a specific candidate or measure. I'm still just stuck on that. So the person is a paid door knocker and knocks on Betty's door, and Betty's vote by mail application is laying on the kitchen table. So door knocker Bob says, Betty, I can't talk to you. I'm so sorry. Let me walk down the street and I'll call you, and then it won't be a crime.
It could get to that. You're right.
On line 24, this also is curious to me. A person commits an offense if the person directly or through a third party knowingly provides or offers to provide compensation or other benefit to another person in exchange for vote harvesting services. And there was some back and forth with Senator Hughes on this point about his intent here was to make sure that a candidate didn't, get around this by making Jim a phone banker and paying Jim for phone banking, but he was really paying Jim for in-person interaction with one or more voters in the physical presence of a ballot intended to deliver votes for a specific candidate. So what if candidate Bob does hire Jim for the phone bank? And then Jim is sitting around with his buddies drinking beer saying, you really ought to vote for Bob. He's a really good guy. And one of them has a vote by mail application sitting on the kitchen table.
I could see that scenario and many others.
So in that circumstance, Jim, the phone banker who is hanging out with his buds saying Bob is really good and you ought to vote for him, he is both criminally liable for vote harvesting, as is Bob the candidate, because Bob is paying Jim to work on his phone bank, right?
Yeah, I'd say Jim is a busy man. Jim's been taking people to vote and he's doing this other stuff too.
God, Jim, boy, he is just like, Interpol needs to get after this Jim dude who's driving people to the polls and talking to them about candidates, because he is a criminal.
I think I would like to hire Jim in my next campaign.
Going down to line 28, a person commits an offense if the person knowingly collects or possesses a mail ballot or official carrier envelope in connection with vote harvesting services. This section does not apply to an activity not performed in exchange for compensation or a benefit, interactions that do not directly involve an official ballot, ballot by mail, or an application for ballot by mail, interactions that are not conducted in person with a voter, activity that is not designed to deliver votes for or against a specific candidate or measure. Again, this is a head scratcher. So it's vote harvesting if it's in person, but not if Jim walks down the street and calls Betty, according to this. It's also not vote harvesting if Jim is doing this on a voluntary basis. So if Jim's getting paid, it's bad, but if he's doing it as a volunteer, it's not, right?
That's correct.
What's inherently fraudulent about paying an election worker versus having a volunteer election worker?
You raise a very good point, and it gets harder and harder to recruit volunteers to campaign. So many people have to resort to paying people, hired help to work.
And then, this provision goes on to say it's not vote harvesting if you do all of this same stuff, but that piece of paper isn't sitting on the kitchen table.
Right. I've been in situations where, especially if you know the voter, and I'm one, I really like to block walk. And I can block walk from sun up to sundown. And many times I knock on somebody's door. It's Mrs. Garcia, who I know. She wants to invite you in for a glass of water or something. And many times, there's the mail is there, and she starts talking about, I got to get my application in or something. So what you described with that situation, this situation, it could happen to any candidate or any paid worker in a campaign.
It gets really scary later on here when we get into the civil liability on this, but I want to take this all the way through, because this guy, Jim, who we've gotten to know pretty well, he seems like a pretty straight up dude, but boy, is he laying himself open for some serious liability here. And possibly his candidate, Bob. This next section, lines 39, it says it's not vote harvesting if the activity is not designed to deliver votes for or against a specific candidate or measure. I'm not really sure what that means. So if they're just sitting around drinking beer, and they're just yakking generally about the election, it's okay? I'm just not really sure what that means. Do you?
No, I think it's unclear. And again, the situation you bring up certainly lends itself to more questions about this.
Yeah, I'm just not sure. So let's go to line 41. In this section, compensation in exchange for vote harvesting services is inferred. This is really problematic, I think. Harvesting services is inferred if a person who performed vote harvesting services for a candidate or campaign solicits, receives, or is offered compensation from the candidate or campaign directly or through a third party for services other than vote harvesting services provided. Again, this goes back to that exchange where Senator Hughes said that the reason for these types of provisions in his bill was to make sure that somebody couldn't just pay Jim for phone banking when they were really utilizing him for in-person interactions with one or more people designed to get them to vote for Bob while there was a ballot present. My concern here is the inference that basically this bill doesn't say it flat out, but does it appear to you that what this section is saying is that if Bob pays Jim for anything, and Jim goes out and in person with one or more people tries to get people to vote for Bob with a ballot present, that now Bob is also liable for vote harvesting by inference?
That's correct.
Even if Bob doesn't know that Jim is out talking to people in person, one or more, about how fabulous Bob is?
Well, we already know that Jim is quite the campaign guy, so I wouldn't be surprised if Jim is out doing that.
This is problematic, I think, because there is a knowing provision up in section C up above on line 24. A person commits an offense if the person directly or through a third party knowingly provides or offers to provide compensation or other benefit. But then in F, it says it's inferred just by fact of Bob paying Jim for something. This seems a little squishy. And an offense under this section is a felony of the third degree. That's higher than a state jail felony. That's one level higher. Bob and Jim are really...
I know earlier we were talking about...
I wasn't a felony prosecutor, so I don't know the penalty range on that.
Okay, yeah, I don't either.
But that's a pretty serious felony, third degree felony. Line 49, if conduct that constitutes an offense under this section also constitutes offense under any other law, the actor may be prosecuted under this section, the other law, or both. So you can stack it. You can hold them civilly liable and criminally liable.
Okay, I have information on the third degree felony. It's punishable by 2 to 10 years imprisonment and a fine of up to $10,000.
Yeah. It's getting up there. Line 52, records necessary to investigate an offense under this section or any other section of this code shall be provided by an election officer in an unredacted form to a law enforcement officer upon request. Records obtained under this subsection are not subject to public disclosure. That's new law. Seems kind of redundant because law enforcement can investigate and request these records in any case. So I'm confused why that's even in there.
I don't know, but you've successfully pointed out several provisions with that same scenario question. Why does it belong? Why does it have to be codified? Yeah.
I'm not really sure why that's even in there. And also, any records that are provided in the course of an investigation aren't subject to public disclosure during the course of the investigation. So it seems redundant. But let's go to the civil liability part. So we've got a third degree felony, possibly, and then we also have civil liability for vote harvesting. A person who is shown by preponderance of the evidence, which is just, more than half, to have violated section 276.015 is civilly liable to any candidate or political party who suffers harm from the vote harvesting services for damages and penalties that may be awarded under subsection C. But check this out. Does this seem odd to you? That harm is defined as having standing to seek relief, and that the other side did what you said they did. Does that sound right as far as harm?
And maybe we should restate that. So anybody who's spending, maybe watching Jimmy Kimmel or something and watching this in between, okay, a person is harmed by the vote harvesting services if the person can demonstrate that the person has standing to seek relief and the liable party violated the section 276.15.
So standing is described by the section above, line 58 and 59. So in order to have standing, all you have to do is be any candidate or political party who suffers harm from the vote harvesting services. But it's cyclical reasoning, because harm is defined as standing. So if you have standing, you're harmed. And if you're harmed, you have standing. And then weirdly, it goes on to say, and this is just amazing to me, what do you think? In line 66, it says, to establish standing, okay, here we are. Maybe they're gonna maybe it's gonna make sense now. To establish standing under this section, a person is not required to demonstrate that the vote harvesting services successfully delivered votes for a specific candidate or measure. So you don't even have to show that they delivered a single vote, but you do have to demonstrate that the vote harvesting services were intended to deliver votes, and that the person opposed the candidate or measure in the person's capacity as a candidate or political party. So I find this so curious. What do you think about this? So in order to have standing, you have to show harm. But you actually don't have to show that any vote harvesting actually occurred.
And I'll read even further on. A party who prevails in an action under this section may recover damages in an amount including any or all of the amount of compensation paid to or received by a party in exchange for vote harvesting services. The fair market value of any benefit given or received in exchange for vote harvesting services, and a penalty in the amount of $35,000 or reasonable and necessary attorney's fees, court costs, witness fees, and discovery cost.
That's mind-blowing. You don't have to prove that a single vote was harvested, but you might be able to get all this stuff. What do you think this is? Is this about chilling people running for office? I'm confused by this.
It certainly would. It could discourage people. It could certainly discourage Jim from ever working in another campaign.
Yeah, Jim is not going to, Jim is going to be super, super concerned about working for another campaign. And Jim might not be driving his ex-mother-in-law to the polls anymore either. Line 14, a party who is a candidate for office who prevails in an action under this section and shows that the number of voters contacted by the vote harvesting activity exceeds the number of votes by which the party lost the election shall recover damages in an amount including any or all of 1, the party's campaign expenditures properly filed, and 2, any fees and expenses incurred in filing. So let's go back to this line 14. A party who is a candidate for office who prevails in an action under this section and shows that the number of voters contacted by the vote harvesting activity exceeds the number that they lost by. It doesn't say the number of votes harvested exceeds the number of votes by which they lost. It just says the numbers of contacts. I mean, in your experience as a candidate, how many contacts are made by a canvasser in the course of a day?
Oh, it's endless. I mean, just myself as a candidate, as I said earlier, I actually enjoy knocking on doors, and I would park my car and load up my signs, carry my own signs and a clipboard, and not return to the car till it was dark. So I don't know. But let's take a step back. We were talking about the third-degree felonies. Do you remember
Yes, ma'am.
where that was? Okay. Unlawful restraint by reckless exposure to substantial risk of serious bodily injury, restraint of a public servant, or while actor in custody. This is about the third degree. Kidnapping, smuggling of persons, indecency with a child by exposure or by causing a child to expose self, assault against a public servant or a security officer on official duty, or a contract employee who works in a correctional or juvenile detention facility or a civil commitment facility. Assault against a family member if the defendant has been previously convicted of an offense against a family member, including assault, homicide, kidnapping, aggravated kidnapping, continuous family violence, and indecency with a child, or against a pregnant woman to force an abortion, injury to a child, elderly individual, or disabled individual, intentionally or knowingly, abandoning or endangering a child without intent to return to the child, deadly conduct, terroristic threat. The list, I could go on and on. Actually, I do have time to go on and on, but I don't want to belabor this point. I think you get
go for it.
You get where I'm going with these examples of third-degree felonies in Texas. There you have it.
So again, this is Jim, who in person talked to one or more people with the intention of getting them to vote for Bob, and there was a vote by mail ballot on the kitchen table. And he is the equivalent of a wife beater.
Okay, I'm sorry, what was your question? I know we're talking about Jim again, and like I said, with all of this, okay, I mean, good guys like Jim is going to think twice about coming to work for my campaign or your campaign, and poor Jim, all he's doing is trying to make contact with a voter.
So poor Jim is not only liable, criminally liable, in the same category with wife beaters and child molesters, but he can also be concurrently civilly liable for Bob's opponent's losing campaign.
Yeah, and again, we are really taking a deep dive into this bill and going page by page, line by line, word by word. And I'm guessing, people watching up there or at home are probably having more questions about this bill. And maybe it will encourage them to get engaged in this dialogue on voter suppression.
So there's also some new law under this about how the civil case against Jim for in-person talking to one or more persons about voting for Bob while a ballot was on the kitchen table. And it's mostly procedural type stuff, which, I don't know. Do you see any issue with it until we get down to, there's a venue provision on line 39. A cause of action under this section may be brought in the county where any element of the violation under section 276.015 occurred, or where any part of the vote harvesting services occurred. That's just a regular venue provision, basically. If this were truly a cause of action. In 43, this section shall be liberally construed and applied to promote its underlying purpose to protect candidates and the voting public from unlawful And whenever it says vote harvesting, I'm just going to plug in the definition. From unlawful speaking in person to one or more people about why you think Bob should be your candidate when there's a ballot on the kitchen table. And provide an efficient and economic remedy to secure that protection against that terrible Jim who keeps talking to people about his candidate. Line 47, unlawful altering of election procedures. A public official may not create, alter, modify, waive, or suspend any election standard, practice, or procedure mandated by law or rule in a manner not expressly authorized by this code. Now, this is a sleeper provision, I think. It's sort of tucked in there, and most people aren't looking at it. But would you say that that provision, section 276.017, is really the kicker on what happened in Harris County? Because in that one sentence, would you agree that one sentence says, no innovation. You can only do what we say you can do, period, full stop.
Yes, and you bring up Harris County, my home county, who was very innovative when it came to putting together a SAFE plan. I believe that's what they called it. And it was put together and approved by a bipartisan group, Democrats and Republicans.
You know, do you think that this provision is in there because of the court challenges to what Harris County was doing with 24-hour and drive-through voting, and the judges, Republican judges, kept coming back saying that's not unlawful under the current election code?
That's correct.
This is an interesting provision because it's pretty sweeping, even though it's just one sentence. So let's go to Article 7, enforcement. Even though there's been a lot of enforcement that we've already found in this bill in its first 17 pages, we have a special section entitled Enforcement now. Line 59, a registrar shall correct a violation within 30 days of a notice under subsection B. If a registrar fails to correct the violation within 30 days of a notice under subsection B, the Secretary of State shall, 1, correct the violation on behalf of the registrar. Thank you, Secretary of State. And 2, notify the Attorney General that the registrar failed to correct a violation under this section. F, a county served by a registrar who fails to correct a violation under subsection E is liable to the state for a civil penalty of $1,000 for each violation corrected by the Secretary of State under that subsection. The Attorney General may bring an action to recover a civil penalty imposed under this section. This is a curious section. Isn't there already a state voter registration database that registrars and the Secretary of State collaborate on?
I believe so.
So as I understand it, local entities send lists up to the Secretary of State of the voters that they're registering. And the Secretary of State looks across all of those data sets that are coming in from the 254 counties, including excuse from jury service, notice of deceased and therefore excused, not eligible for jury service, the DPS information and whatnot. And then the voter registrars can pull that information down and correct their voter rolls. Why do you suppose this bill puts a $1,000 fine for each violation corrected by the Secretary of the State? Didn't the Secretary of State already correct it?
You you would think, I mean, we have, you know, aside from that one, we've imposed so many penalties throughout this bill, many that are overreaching.
This just seemed, does it seem heavy-handed to you? The Secretary of State can notify the registrar, you need to correct this, and if the registrar doesn't, by the plain statement of this bill, the Secretary of State can go in and correct it themselves. Isn't that true?
Yes.
So I could see the Secretary of State notifying the Commissioner's Court of that county, hey, you got a lazy registrar down there who didn't make this correction and I had to do it for him. That seems appropriate, but $1,000 fined to the people of that county for every failure of that elections administrator?
Yeah,
Does that seem...
for each one.
Seems a little high-handed. And who pays for that $1,000 fine per? Where does that money come from?
Yet another question when it comes to fiscal impact.
Most counties rely almost exclusively on property tax. So that's probably coming off that county's property tax rolls. The next line. Oh, this is interesting. A civil penalty collected by the Attorney General under this.
Senator, which line are you on?
Oh, I'm sorry. Page 19, line 3. A civil penalty collected by the Attorney General under this section shall be deposited in the state treasury to the credit of the General Revenue Fund. Does this seem to you like a transfer of local property tax to the General Revenue Fund of the state, even after the Secretary of State already made the correction?
It certainly does.
What could possibly be the benefit to just moving county money up to the state? It doesn't get rid of the registrar who was not making the corrections, does it?
No.
All right, section 7.02 and line 8, restrictions on eligibility. In this section, election official means, and then it has a list of everything it could possibly mean. A county clerk, a permanent or temporary deputy county clerk, an elections administrator, a permanent or temporary employee of an elections administrator, an election judge, an alternate election judge, an early voting clerk, a deputy early voting clerk, an elections clerk, the presiding judge of an early voting ballot board. It goes on, and basically it's just everybody who is employed by the county in the administration of elections. Is that your reading of it too?
That's exactly right. I'm looking at the whole list right now.
And then when you dip down to line 37 on page 19, it says, a person may not serve as any of these things above if the person has been finally convicted of an offense under this code. So we've gone through those offenses. They're pretty harsh. But on top of that, you lose your job and benefits.
That's correct.
So again, we still haven't found anywhere in this bill where a poll watcher is held accountable through civil, criminal, or administrative fine. But for an election worker, they're liable to criminal offense, civil penalties, administrative fines, as well as loss of job and benefits.
Yes, I'm following you.
Is that fair?
I don't see how that could be.
How much do election workers, how much does a temporary employee of an election administrator make in Harris County? Do you know?
I don't recall. I don't know.
I think the starting salary in the Travis County Clerk's office is about $42,000 a year for a full-time. it's going to be, do you think it's going to be harder to get people to work in the clerk's office and in the elections division?
Oh, not only that, but as I mentioned earlier, on early vote, the election clerks and the clerks that work on election day.
It's hard to get those people, it's hard to fill those jobs in any case, not to mention the, trying to get Jim to work for your phone bank.
Yeah, Jim's, I'm sure, a very highly sought after guy, but after reading this bill, he's going to think twice about working in any campaign.
And then, Jane, who works as an elections clerk, I'm worried about her, although didn't Senator Hinojosa was it Senator Hinojosa who managed to get at least the civil penalties